Chapter 546. The midsummer in Mormons was still as cold as winter. It rained in the cold winter. The endless rain seemed to drift from Reki City to the northernmost part of snow country. It was not hurried, but the rain mixed with some broken ice hit people's faces and made them feel painful. Mormons in the Rain was an extremely sharp city. The everlasting night remained unchanged. It rained between heaven and earth, and it was as sharp as a sword. When Deity got off the plane, the night in Mormons was dark and hazy. He looked down at the time on his watch. In a trance, he couldn't tell whether it was day or night. Wisps of white air rose with his breath. At this time, it was the warmest season in Mormons. He reached out his hand and shook it casually. Feeling the cold rain between his fingers, he was silent for a long time. A black off-road vehicle was parked not far in front of the plane. As soon as Deity got off the plane, the door of the off-road vehicle had been opened. A middle-aged man less than 50 years old walked over quickly. The middle-aged man's appearance was not outstanding, but his every move was unusually calm. He was the kind of person who could make people feel at ease at first glance. Deity glanced at him, and his eyes softened quietly. He smiled and waved at him. The middle-aged man paused and glanced at Daybreak. His eyes were a little cold. Then he walked up to Deity and said expressionlessly, "Where are you going, Your Highness?" This attitude was definitely not good. But Deity didn't mind at all. He just smiled kindly and said, "Have you had dinner? Do you want to have a bite nearby?" "No need." The middle-aged man said blandly, "Where are you going?" "Tianyin. Watch your attitude." Daybreak finally couldn't bear it anymore. "Don't forget who is standing in front of you." Attitude. The middle-aged man's voice was cold. He seemed to be responding to Daybreak, but his eyes were looking straight into Deity's eyes. He was sharp and direct. "What attitude do you want?" Daybreak's eyes darkened, and he was faintly angry. Deity suddenly waved his hand. "Well, we're on the same side. What's the point of quarreling as soon as we meet?" "I'm not talking to him." Tianyin looked at Deity calmly. "Your Highness, what attitude do you want?" Dawn and Daybreak's faces changed. They looked at Deity and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Deity fell silent. The atmosphere in the heavy rain suddenly became a little depressing. "Your Highness, Tianyin isn't." The anger in Daybreak's eyes suddenly subsided, and he pleaded for Tianyin. Deity waved his hand. He looked into Tianyin's eyes and said softly, "What I want is your attitude." "My attitude is very clear." Tianyin's tone was calm. Deity took a deep look at him, walked past him, and got into the off-road vehicle. Tianyin stood there, bathed in the rain, his eyes clear and stubborn. "What are you doing?" Daybreak winked at Dawn, asking him to follow Deity. Then he walked up to Tianyin and questioned him in a low voice. Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Tianyin. The three masters under the god of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were Daybreak, Dawn, and Phoenix, who respectively controlled the most elite and terrifying Sinluo, life-prolonging, and Athanasi halls in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. However, the code name, Tianyin, was not ordinary. In the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, being able to use the word Tian as a code name had an extraordinary meaning. Tianyin was the deputy captain of the Athanasia Hall. He was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and was also Phoenix's most important assistant. This position was very high in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, but it was still far from deities. But the problem was that inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, there were too many stories about their own positions. How could a simple position determine the hierarchy? The relationship between Tianyin and Deity was no less than that between Daybreak and Deity. But even so, he still thought that Tianyin's performance was a bit excessive this time. Secretly competing with His Highness and confronting Deity were two completely different concepts. "Nothing," Tianyin said expressionlessly. "Nothing. Why are you crazy?" Daybreak sneered. Tianyin looked at the falling rain in the night. After a long time he said faintly, "The rain is too heavy. I don't like it." He turned around and walked to the off-road vehicle. Daybreak looked at his back quietly. Tianyin's back was straight, but he felt a trace of loneliness from this straightness. Daybreak was a little annoyed and lost in thought. Loneliness. He had never thought that Tianyin would feel lonely among them. This was a real brother who had saved him, Daybreak, and even Deity. He was also a brother who had been saved by him and deity. On the battlefield, they could trust each other with all their lives. He would be lonely. Why? Daybreak shook his head hard and walked to the off-road vehicle. The rain in Mormons was too heavy, and the purgatory of Heaven Capital was too big. In the vast purgatory of Heaven Capital, he suddenly wanted to know who else would feel lonely. The off-road vehicle turned around and left in the increasingly messy heavy rain. Tianyin was silent as he drove. Did we get anything in Mormons? Deity broke the silence and suddenly asked. No. Tianyin shook his head. He was a little serious, but his tone was still a little bland. The Samsara Palace left almost no traces here. We have checked in all fields, but there is no trace of the Samsara Palace. After the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, I investigated some members of the Polar Ground Alliance and found a lot of things. There are a total of 22 four-star deacons who may be from the Samsara Palace, but it is only a possibility. According to our analysis, the lowest possibility is less than 5%, and the highest possibility is only 17%. Again, we haven't found any evidence at present. Deity did not speak, but the corners of Daybreak's and Daybreak's eyes twitched, and they looked at each other. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, it was the largest and only superpower in Eastern Europe. In this behemoth spanning many countries in Eastern Europe, deacons were the real main force. The highest level of deacons was 5-star, and above them were the members of the alliance. It was no exaggeration to say that any 4-star deacon was a respected middle-level or high-level figure in the Polar Ground Alliance. How many 4-star deacons were there in the entire Polar Ground Alliance? How many could they put down in Snow Country? If the Samsara Palace really had the ability to control 22 4-star deacons, it meant that they had monopolized nearly 1/5 of the Polar Ground Alliance's right to speak. This was simply a fantasy. They really hid it well. Deity whispered to himself. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital had started to make arrangements in Mormons more than 3 years ago. The earliest time was even before the final battle of East Island. At that time, Jianghu State was still plotting against East Island. The master of Samsara Palace had just made an appointment to fight Gu Xingyun, and Daybreak had the first talk with Qin Weibai. In the end, there was the overall situation of the cooperation between the Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Qin Weibai did not hide anything. With East Island as the beginning and Eastern Europe as the end, the whole orderly but extremely complicated plan had been told to Deity from that time. Mormons would be the end of everything, and it would also be the place of the final battle. Deity naturally had to plant the seeds in Mormons as soon as possible. And the first batch of people to be sent to Eastern Europe, of course, had to be the kind of people he absolutely trusted and would not have the slightest doubt. There were 80 such people. Tianyin was the leader of this group of people. That was why Tianyin missed the final battle of East Island. Half a year ago, Tianyin should have resigned from his post here and returned to East Island to enjoy his life. He did go back, but he came back here in less than 3 months. Now Tianyin was still in control here. Deity had the same trust in him. Let's go here. Deity took out a map and pointed out a place to Tianyin. The terrain of Mormons was complicated, and so was the map. Tianyin glanced at it. Then the off-road vehicle turned and began to speed up. It's the place where the urban area and the suburbs meet. There seems to be a manor. What else? Tianyin asked. That's the manor. Deity said with a smile. I made an appointment with Qin Weibai. This is the place she set. Tianyin said calmly, I'll investigate it carefully. Thank you. Deity looked at Tianyin for a while, then suddenly reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Tianyin did not stay silent, nor did he say any polite words. He just said calmly, Since it's been hard, when will your highness reward me? Tianyin. Daybreak's voice was cold. He really felt a little angry. Deity interrupted his anger and asked with a smile, What do you want? There's no need to be polite between us. As expected, Tianyin did not stand on ceremony. He said lightly, Sinluo, life-prolonging, and Athanasi halls. Give me one. He glanced at Daybreak and Dawn. Daybreak and Dawn did not hesitate at all. They said in unison, I'll give you mine. Don't. I want Athanasi Hall. Tianyin directly interrupted the two of them. Daybreak and Dawn looked at each other and saw the bitterness and helplessness in each other's eyes. Sinluo, Athanasi, and life-prolonging. The power of the 3 hall masters in the purgatory of heaven capital was second only to deity. If Tianyin wanted to take it, Daybreak and Dawn could give it to him. No matter if it was Sinluo Hall or the life-prolonging hall. At this stage of friendship, a little power was really nothing. But Tianyin did not want it. He just wanted Athanasi Hall. The master of Athanasi Hall was Phoenix. Daybreak looked at deity, coughed, and said, Tianyin, I promise you that the comprehensive combat capability of Sinluo Hall is definitely stronger than that of Athanasi Hall. How about I follow His Highness and you go to Sinluo Hall? Among the 3 giants of the purgatory of heaven capital, Daybreak was the strongest. Sinluo Hall was naturally stronger than the other 2 halls. If Tianyin took over this position, he could be said to be the real number 2 figure in the purgatory of heaven capital. Tianyin glanced at him. His eyes suddenly became a little mocking and mean. I take over Sinluo Hall? Do I have to do something if I take it? There are some things that you don't have to do. I'm embarrassed. I want to be shameless. Besides, I don't want those brothers who died early to poke at my back. Daybreak's face changed slightly. He smiled bitterly and said nothing. Well, why don't you take over my... Shut up. Tianyin glanced at Dawn and said directly. Dawn shrugged his shoulders and stopped talking as expected. Tianyin just looked at deity and said calmly, Your Highness, will you give it to me or not? Daybreak sighed softly and finally kept silent. Tianyin's seniority was extremely high. Even in the Undying Palace, the Phoenix was still very polite and respectful to him, treating him as a big brother. Previously, he did not know how the Phoenix offended Tianyin, but now he understood. The one who offended Tianyin was not the Phoenix, but His Highness. If I don't give it to you, what will you do? Deity suddenly asked. His eyes were still soft as he looked at Tianyin. What will you do? Tianyin was silent for a while and laughed at himself. What can I do? If your Highness is reluctant, just let me leave the purgatory of heaven capital and go home. Go home, deity whispered. Linen? No, go to Tiannan. Tianyin whispered, and his eyes softened. I miss the young master. Deity was his master. But he had the young master. There was only one. There was only one. This was the biggest difference. Deity was silent. After a long time he said slowly, Why? There were many meanings in this question, but there was no emotion, not at all. Deity was calm, without sadness or joy. Tianyin was silent for a long time before he slowly asked, Because you can't imagine what a child who has lived in despair and fear since he was a child is like. He desperately wants to hold on to everything, desperately wants to protect everything, but he has been powerless. He can't cry, he can't retreat, and he can't be weak. When he is tired, sleepy, tired, or in pain, he can only grit his teeth and keep silent. You don't understand these, so you won't think about the meaning of his existence. If he didn't understand, of course, there was no meaning. Deity was in a daze and suddenly said, He cried in front of me. Yes, in front of you and only in front of you. Otherwise, who else can he be in front of? Only when he is in front of you, he feels that he is a child. Tianyin laughed mockingly and was extremely cold. But I don't think he will think so now. Deity's heart ached for no reason, and he was silent. The car moved slowly on the flat road in the wind and rain. The street lights on both sides were gradually receding. After going around and around for nearly an hour, when the off-road vehicle was about to leave the city, Deity finally saw the manor built between the darkness and the light. The off-road vehicle stopped at the gate of the manor. 2 security guards in front of the door walked over quietly, looked at Deity, and asked politely, Who are you looking for? Deity opened the door and got out of the car. He stood in front of the door and looked at the manor in the dark. The manor was hazy, as if it was shrouded in a faint white mist. The temperature was 0 degrees, and it was raining all over the sky, but the inside of the manor was like heaven. There were clusters of flowers, green grass, and dense trees. In the huge manor, every corner was full of vitality. It was full of vitality. Deity looked at everything in the manor with a complicated look in his eyes. After a long time he slowly said, Tell Qin Wei Bai that I am here. The wind and rain between heaven and earth suddenly quieted down. In an instant, the deep darkness seemed to completely solidify in an instant. Tianyin opened the door. Daybreak was ready to get out of the car. Dawn was going to speak. Deity was going to take a step. But everyone's movements froze in place in an instant. Deity's body tensed up, and he looked into the depths of the manor. A little darkness stretched out in his hand. In an instant, the ink in his hand had turned into a huge and ferocious black sickle. Before entering the door, Deity had already entered the fighting state. A wave of incomparably violent emotions suddenly filled the world. Anger, coldness, disgust, rejection, cruelty, excitement. Countless emotions finally turned into the coldest killing intent, which directly spread throughout the entire manor. A little light appeared in front of Deity. It was colorful. The white clothes in his sight were flickering slightly. Every time she took a step, there was a colorful flowing light under her feet, which was dreamy and illusory. Qin Weibai's figure was erratic, and she finally appeared beside Deity. The killing intent between heaven and earth had completely condensed in one place, as if thunder would break out at any time. Qin Weibai's body was filled with colorful light, and she looked ethereal. Deity did not look at her, but stared at the nothingness behind her. After a long time he slowly said, "Is this the sword phoenix mentioned?" Qin Weibai nodded and said apologetically, "It has a bad temper, and I can't control it." Deity smiled with a complicated meaning. Qin Weibai said calmly, "Your Highness, since you are here, why don't you go in and sit down and talk slowly?" Chapter 547. Reki City finally ushered in the long-lost peace. With the withdrawal of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican, the entire Wulan state became completely calm. Prime Minister Riker became extremely busy. He dealt with the media, gave a speech to the people of Wulan state, strengthened their confidence, and looked forward to real peace. At the same time, he had to let his trusted subordinates infiltrate the various systems of Wulan state bit by bit. In addition, he had to negotiate with the Rekvia family, prepare for next year's election, and receive Li Huaqing, the president of Jianghu state, who would soon visit Wulan state. He also had to rebuild the presidential palace. Wulan state was very busy. Everyone was busy. President Li Huaqing's private plane would arrive at Reki City International Airport at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. It seemed like a visit, but also like a tour. The calm and busy atmosphere impacted all levels of Wulan state with an unprecedented force, like big waves, strong winds, and heavy rains. The general trend was mighty, and the former rules began to disappear one by one. In Wulan state, wherever the will of Jianghu state went, there would be new rules. From tomorrow on, Wulan state would officially enter a new era. The entire country, whether it was anticipation or unwillingness, joy or anger, everyone was preparing for the new era. Every minute and second of Prime Minister Riker's time was extremely precious. Under such circumstances, he could sit outside Li Tianlan's study and wait quietly for 3 hours without showing the slightest anxiety, which showed the strength of the Prime Minister's heart. Li Tianlan was not in a hurry. Xianxia's disappearance did not seem to bring him much pressure. As soon as he learned the news, he only sent a small number of people to find Xianxia's whereabouts. After sending people out, Li Tianlan had not asked what the result was until now. There was no vice-marshal in the snow dance corps. All the tasks were on the 2 deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. There were Riker and Rekvia in Wulan state. After the war, Li Tianlan had plenty of time. All he could do was wait. They were waiting for Li Huaqing to visit Wulan state. Other than that, he spent most of his time meditating and honing his sword intent. Ever since he was young, he firmly believed that power, wealth, and everything else could be fake, but only his own strength could be real. It was also the most basic thing. The storm in Reki City gradually subsided. The rainy season was over, and winter was coming. When Li Tianlan woke up from meditation, the cold sword intent in the room had almost frozen everything in the study. A few steady heartbeats were audible to his senses. For clarity, Li Tianlan looked around. There was a soft couch in the study. Beside him was Dongqing Rushi, and a little farther away were Lin Yuxian and Li Wangxing. Together with Li Beitian and Ning Qianqing, they would be his core team in the future. Li Tianlan was never stingy with them. The whole world knew that his swordsmanship was perfect. When he practiced martial arts, he deliberately called Lin Yuxian and Li Wangxing over and imparted his understanding of swordsmanship to them without reservation. As for how much they could comprehend, it depended on their respective talents. Now, It seemed that everyone had gained something. Dongqing Rushi had broken through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm for a while, and now her realm had been completely stabilized. Li Wangxing also showed signs of breaking through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Lin Yoxian's progress was undoubtedly the slowest, but it was not because his talent was the worst. It was because all aspects of his conditions were close to perfection. After he broke through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, even Li Tianlan's kendo did not help him much. This might be the most gratifying thing for the Lin clan. Obviously, Lin Yuxian was about to find his own way. Li Tianlan's eyes swept across everyone's faces. After a moment of silence, he stood up and walked out of the study. "Your Highness." Riker, who had gradually forgotten how long he had waited, stood up immediately and bowed slightly. Li Tianlan nodded, waved his hand, and motioned for him to sit down. "Why are you here?" "Here's the thing." Riker deliberated over his words and said cautiously, "The heads of state of Ross, Oga, Neoya Federation, and Drac have now arrived in Reki City. They hope to meet Your Highness today. I wonder if it's convenient for you, Your Highness?" Wulon State, Ross, Oga, Neoya Federation, and Drac were the 5 Eastern European countries coveted by the whole world. The 5 countries advanced and retreated together, representing a large number of core interests in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan conquered Wulon State. He should have met the heads of state of the other 4 countries a long time ago, but he never had the time. But today, Li Tianlan's eyes were a little cold. After a moment of silence, he finally shook his head and said, "No need. President Li Huaqing will come tomorrow. We can meet them together." "But, Your Highness, this meeting is very—" Riker wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "I know." Li Tianlan interrupted him but didn't say much. Even if Riker was one of his own, there was no need to let him know too much about some things. Jiang Shangyu's disappearance had a great impact on him. Li Tianlan had received a phone call from Dongqing Wudi. In addition to a large delegation, there was also a supervisory group following Li Huaqing to Wulon State tomorrow. And it was the supervisory group directly affiliated with Kunlun City. There were only 5 people in the supervisory group, but all of them were thunder-shocking realm experts, which was rare. They came to Eastern Europe specifically to investigate the disappearance of Jiang Shangyu, and they pointed the spearhead at Li Tianlan. This was the collective decision of the Zhongzhou State Parliament. Even Dongqing Wudi did his best to stop it. It could be seen how much the members of Zhongzhou State were afraid of him now. What was ridiculous was that everyone thought that Li Tianlan was in Eastern Europe because he wanted to run Eastern Europe with his own army. In fact, Li Tianlan really wanted to leave here and develop in Tiannan. But in any case at this time, Li Tianlan could only stay still and not move. Li Huaqing would arrive in Reki City tomorrow. The day before, Li Tianlan had received the heads of state of the 5 countries. When the news reached Eastern Europe, it could only make Zhongzhou State more afraid and suspicious of him. "I can't," Li Tianlan said slowly. His tone was calm and he spoke very slowly, but there was still a sense of depression accumulating in his heart. What kind of person was Riker? As a real old fox in politics, he almost smelled something wrong at the first time. "Zhongzhou State?" he asked cautiously. Li Tianlan glanced at him and did not speak. Riker suddenly understood what was going on. He smiled bitterly and whispered, "In this case, I'm afraid that President Li Huaqing can't control the situation." Li Tianlan could not meet the heads of state of the 4 countries today. Although it was only one day, in fact, it was a world apart. Although a considerable part of the delegation led by Li Huaqing was the power of the giant group, he had to leave some soup for other groups. These people were a mix of good and bad. Who knew what would happen after tomorrow? Not to mention these people, even President Li Huaqing might have other plans in his heart. After all, allies and their own people were 2 completely different concepts. After all, this is Eastern Europe, right? Li Tianlan glanced at Riker, intentionally or unintentionally, and said calmly and indifferently, "Yes." Riker was shocked and thought about the meaning of Li Tianlan's words. But he said without hesitation, "Please rest assured, Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded and suddenly asked, "How is the Sword Emperor these days?" Chapter 548. This question was too easy to answer. Not only Riker, but probably everyone in the Snowdance Corps now knew the Sword Emperor's whereabouts. The Sword Emperor didn't do anything. She simply couldn't be more obedient.
He didn't do anything. Rick pondered seriously for a moment before he said, "Presently, the Sword Emperor is very idle every single day.
He drinks tea and drinks wine. Besides that, he spends most of his time practicing calligraphy." Practicing calligraphy? Li Tianlan was in a trance for a moment.
Riker nodded as if he suddenly thought of something and then said, "By the way, His Majesty asked the Snow Dance Corps to prepare 2 sets of Han clothes for him yesterday."
It was a very strange request. Li Tianlan did not speak. The kimono of East Island was similar to the Han costume, with wide robes and wide sleeves, but the latter was more complicated, gorgeous, and exquisite than the kimono. On the eve of Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State, Wang Tianzong wanted to wear this ancient costume. In a sense, it was tantamount to showing that he still had his heart in Jianghu State. This kind of statement was very obscure, but Li Huaqing would definitely be happy to see it. Li Tianlan thought about it casually and didn't take it seriously.
He just asked, "What did he write?"
"I don't know." Rick shook his head helplessly. Now the whole world knew that Wang Tianzong was imprisoned in the office of the president of Wulan State by Li Tianlan, but only Wulan State did not dare to think so. Inside and outside Wulan State, everyone in the Snow Dance Corps was polite and respectful to Wang Tianzong. He did not want to publicize what Wang Tianzong had written. Did anyone really dare to read it? Li Tianlan leaned on the sofa, lit a cigarette, and muttered to himself, "Practice calligraphy, Hanfu." Suddenly he asked, "Are you sure he only got a few sets of ancient clothes?" "I'm sure," Rick said without hesitation. Wang Tianzong's purchase of ancient costumes through the Snow Dance Corps was sent to his desk as soon as possible. In the past 20 years, Wulan State and Jianghu State had always been at odds. Naturally, there was no market for the so-called ancient costumes of Jianghu State. Riker still asked someone to buy them from Im and carefully checked them several times before handing them to Wang Tianzong. He personally took over all of this and watched them being sent to Wang Tianzong. There could be no other things in between. Li Tianlan took a drag on his cigarette and fell into deep thought. He completely let go of the matter of the ancient costume. He was thinking about why Wang Tianzong wanted to practice calligraphy. His thoughts kept drifting away. He thought of the Li family, the Lin clan, the Wang family of Beihai, and even more than 20 years ago. When he was at the border of Jianghu State, Li Honghe made him practice calligraphy every day since he was a child, and even before he left. A worn-out writing brush landed on the yellowish-white rice paper. Every stroke was a swordlight. But this was not the path of the Li family. The Li family's 24 moves of sword only wanted the sword energy to be sharp and break the sky. This was also not the path of the Wang family of Beihai. The martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai broke out in an instant and became invincible in the world. But now Wang Tianzong was practicing calligraphy. Every move of the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State was not meaningless. The Lin clan began to become clear in his mind. He thought of Lin Youxian's attack in front of him. The martial arts of the Lin clan and the Li family were of the same origin, but they were different from each other. They had the same map of God of War and the same 24 moves of sword. The Li family focused on the sword, while the Lin clan focused on the intent. It was not until Li Tianlan traveled thousands of miles in the past 3 years that he understood the meaning of Li Honghe's asking him to practice calligraphy. His sword intent became perfect in the 3-year journey, and the starting point of all this was that worn-out writing brush. Practicing calligraphy was practicing swordsmanship. Wang Tianzong was accumulating his sword intent. Li Honghe understood the emphasis of the Lin clan's martial arts. So did Wang Tianzong. The sword intent continued to be all-encompassing. Wang Tianzong had really reached the last step of the breakthrough. Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little cold inside. He looked out of the window and did not speak for a long time. "Your Highness, do you want—" Riker coughed and hesitated. "No need." Li Tianlan shook his head. "From now on, you don't need to pay attention to the Sword Emperor." "How can that be?" Riker stood up subconsciously. "It's useless to pay attention to it. Let's wait." Li Tianlan stood up and walked to the study, saying calmly, "Wait for him to leave." Riker's brain went blank for a moment, and he asked instinctively, "Where are you going, Your Highness?" Li Tianlan did not look back, but said calmly, "I'm also practicing calligraphy." He pushed open the door of the study and walked in. The petite Dongqing Rushi had already woken up. She blinked her clear eyes and said, "Do you want to practice calligraphy?" Li Tianlan looked at her, smiled, and said softly, "Get the pen and paper ready." He should have thought of this method a long time ago. When he was in the Sky Academy, when he wrote the 3 words East Emperor Palace, he vaguely knew this method. But now he remembered it after being reminded by Wang Tianzong. Using the pen as a sword and condensing the sword intent. It was to hide the sword and also to nurture the sword. This might be the only way for him to make the perfect sword intent go further. Dongqing Rushi quickly prepared the pen and paper and stood beside Li Tianlan to grind the ink. Her body had a very light fragrance, and she looked very focused. The sound of wind and rain came into his ears. Li Tianlan stood in front of the table with the pen, as if he was holding a sword. A sword intent condensed into a line from his wrist and the tip of the pen. Li Tianlan looked at the paper in front of him quietly. His eyes were calm, like the deep starry sky. At the same time, in the only intact room in the office of the president, Wang Tianzong was also practicing calligraphy. He was wearing a dark Han costume. His lapel and sleeves were fluttering, but his hand holding the pen was unusually stable and did not tremble at all. The room was intact, the white paper, the heavy ink, the dark ancient costume, and the tall and straight figure. Everything seemed to become one invisibly. Everything in the world was shaking gently with the pen in Wang Tianzong's hand. Everything finally became a sword. It was extremely solemn and dignified. Only a few hundred words appeared on the paper, one stroke at a time. Wang Tianzong's handwriting was not beautiful, and it could not even be said to be particularly neat. But there was a kind of awe-inspiring and even submissive power between the horizontal and vertical strokes. This kind of power was not sharp, but heavy enough to crush everything in an instant. His eyes were focused and serious. He put the pen down. The last word. At the same time, Li Tianlan's pen crossed the paper. The first word. An extremely violent sword energy flew up in an instant as Li Tianlan put the pen down, expanding to the whole study, layer upon layer, mysterious and unpredictable. In the study, it instantly became cold. Dongqing Rushi, who was standing next to Li Tianlan, moved a little uneasily. Everything in her sight did not change, but vaguely, it seemed that the whole space began to gradually condense. The sword energy became more and more fierce with the stroke of the pen tip. Lin Fengting, who was meditating, opened his eyes directly. He glanced around blankly and finally saw Li Tianlan behind the desk. This scene was too familiar to him. His pupils suddenly shrank. Li Wangxing also woke up. Everyone's eyes fell on the rice paper in front of Li Tianlan. That was his first word. It was simple. There was only one horizontal stroke, which was 1. No one knew that in the office of the president, Wang Tianzong's last word was also simple. There was only one horizontal stroke, which was also 1. It ended with one word. It began with one word. One word was like a sword. Chapter 549. There was no polar night in Reki City. But the continuous heavy rain made Reki City gloomy day and night. There was rain everywhere. There was no sunlight, and the night was no longer pure. Because of the heavy rain, the special flight from Jianghu State to Reki City was delayed for several hours. When the special plane painted with the star flag landed at the airport, it was close to noon. It was 10:40 in the morning on August 23 in Eastern Europe. President Li Huaqing of Jianghu State officially arrived in Wulan State. Jianghu State's footsteps were moving. From today on, the whole of Eastern Europe would officially enter a new era with the footsteps of Jianghu State. The welcome ceremony could not be any more grand. Headed by Prime Minister Rieker, all the high-level officials of Wulan State were present. Both sides of the airport were filled with welcoming crowds with flowers in their hands. The aisle was full of salutes. In order to welcome President Li Huaqing, Prime Minister Rieker had specially changed his own car the day before. It was a red flag car for high-level officials of Jianghu State. The black and quaint body was parked quietly in the airport, which was very eye-catching. Almost all the media in Eastern Europe praised President Li Huaqing's visit. They called this visit the first handshake between Jianghu State and Eastern Europe, and said that the arrival of President Li Huaqing was of epoch-making significance to Wulan State and the whole of Eastern Europe. With the help of Jianghu State, the whole of Eastern Europe was bound to be more brilliant tomorrow. Jianghu State was bound to be the most trustworthy friend of the Eastern European people, and Eastern Europe would become the most loyal partner of Jianghu State.
All of them sang praises of merit and virtue.
After the collapse of the Violet family and the Morton family, the advantages of the Qin clan and the Rekvia family in the media were fully manifested. The two families almost effortlessly controlled the direction of public opinion in Eastern Europe. In the endless praise of the media, President Li Huaqing came to Eastern Europe this time as a savior. The image of the entire Jianghu state became extremely high and bright. As the representative of Jianghu state in Wulan state at this time, Li Tianlan was standing on the other side of the welcoming team of Wulan state, subtly distancing himself from the delegation of Wulan state. Behind him stood the two vice-marshals of the Snowdance Corps, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. There were only 3 of them. 1 marshal and 2 lieutenant generals. The 3 of them were dressed in military uniforms. They stood there silently and indifferently, like 3 unsheathed swords. Countless cameras near the airport were moving in an orderly manner, recording all the images and sending them to major TV stations around the world as soon as possible. At this moment, Wulan state had become the focus of the world. In the heavy rain, the plane finally stopped. The gangway ladder fell and the cabin opened. The figure of President Li Huaqing of Jianghu state appeared in front of the cabin door. The president, who was in his 60s, was full of energy and waved to the crowd below with a smile. His eyes were calm and gentle, and he looked straight ahead as if he had seen far away. At this moment, whether it was the general or the prime minister, the senior officials or the civilians, or even this country, they all belonged to Jianghu state. Li Huaqing was in a trance for a moment, and then he took a deep look at Li Tianlan, who was standing on the other side of the crowd. Li Huaqing adjusted his mood, walked down the gangway ladder slowly, and shook hands with Prime Minister Riker, who was coming toward him. There were not many high-level officials of Wulan state. Riker followed him and introduced everyone's duties in detail. It was not known whether Li Huaqing was listening or not, but he just nodded with a calm smile. After shaking hands with the last high-level official of Wulan state, Li Huaqing walked up to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, who was dressed in military uniform, stood taller. His expression was calm, and he raised his hand to salute. "You're very good. The Snowdance Corps is very good." Li Huaqing stood in front of Li Tianlan, and his voice was soft and clear. "Thank you, Marshal Li." He reached out his hand and tidied Li Tianlan's military uniform and rank. Then, he raised his arm and saluted back solemnly. In an instant, the flashing lights of countless cameras connected into one. The next second, the whole world was in an uproar. Because countless cameras directly captured the epaulets on Li Tianlan's shoulders. The dark world was okay. But ordinary people all over the world could not believe their eyes. For ordinary people, they might not understand what the sharp sword on Li Tianlan's epaulette meant, but few people did not know what the 4 golden stars surrounded by the golden olive branch meant. Marshal of Jianghu State. Such a young marshal. The TV screens of various countries froze on Li Tianlan's face and epaulettes. The combination of the young and calm face and the golden epaulettes brought an almost unforgettable impact and made everyone's heart surge. This might be the first time that the special warfare system of Jianghu State appeared in front of the world. At this moment, it was raining in Reki City. But Li Tianlan stood in front of Li Huaqing and the whole world under the rain, and he was unprecedentedly brilliant. Mormons. In the living room of the manor, Li Tianlan's face appeared on the ultra-clear TV screen. A white and slender palm gently touched Li Tianlan's face across the screen, gentle and almost careful. Qin Weibai's fingers moved gently on the screen. She stared deeply at the picture on the TV, and her warm eyes were full of intoxication. "Is he handsome?" she asked suddenly. The picture on the TV began to change. Qin Weibai turned around and looked at a woman behind her. She was dressed in a white dress. The woman behind her was dressed in a white robe. "Handsome," the woman in the white robe said softly. She was tall and slender, and her face was exquisite. She looked dreamlike and perfect without any flaws. "You really have a good eye." She looked at Qin Weibai and exclaimed sincerely. "Do you like it?" Qin Weibai asked softly. The woman hesitated and lowered her head. Light footsteps sounded outside the door. Flaming Fire walked in, looked at Qin Weibai, and said, "Boss, are you looking for me?" "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded, turned to look at the screen and said calmly, "Since the president is here, our plan should start. Inform him to get ready for action." "Okay." Flaming Fire, who had been prepared, nodded. She took 2 steps back and was ready to leave.
But the moment she turned around, her eyes inadvertently swept over the woman in the white robe behind Qin Weibai. The woman just raised her head, and their eyes met. The woman in the white robe looked a little surprised.
But Flaming Fire's body suddenly stiffened.
She stared at the woman in her sight, as if she had seen a ghost.
Go and do your work. Qin Weibai's cold voice sounded. Flaming Fire suddenly came to her senses, turned around subconsciously, and left. Before she went out, she staggered and almost fell down. Qin Weibai turned to look at the woman in the white robe behind her. She was dreamlike, perfect and flawless, like a phantom. She was silent for a long time before she repeated her question. Do you like it?
The woman in the white robe hesitated.
Qin Weibai said directly, I'll give him to you, okay? Chapter 550.
There was a dead silence in the room. Only the voice on the TV screen was endlessly praising the friendliness, tolerance, and fraternity of Jianghu State. More than 80% of the people in Wulon State were eagerly looking forward to the cooperation between Wulon State and Jianghu State. Everything was so beautiful. But the reality was so cruel. News and reality were like 2 different worlds. The screen was constantly switching. President Li Huaqing. Prime Minister Riker. Many high-level officials of Wulon State. A large delegation. The young, sharp, and calm marshal of Jianghu State, who was as deep as the starry sky. In the constantly switching pictures, a group of people walked to the black car with a red flag at the airport. Prime Minister Riker took 2 quick steps, bent down, and opened the door for Li Huaqing himself. This scene fell into the eyes of people all over the world. The salute and cheers seemed to pause for a moment. The news also paused for a moment. Li Huaqing smiled and sat in the back of the car. But Prime Minister Riker did not get up. He still kept his bent posture and waited with a smile on his face. The young marshal who had shocked the world looked at Riker with a smile and also got into the car. Riker straightened up and carefully closed the door. The news anchor was obviously stuttering. He stuttered a few lines before he regained his composure. The woman in white and Qin Weibai watched this scene quietly. Qin Weibai's eyes were warm and gentle. That kind of deep love was extremely strong, with a kind of unforgettable power. The woman in white was in a trance. Her eyes were bright. When she was in a trance, her cold eyes were like a shaking starry sky. I'll give him to you, okay? Qin Weibai said softly. Her voice was very light, but it carried the weight of the world. Give him to me. The woman in white's voice was clear and soft, with a kind of confusion and complexity, as if it were yesterday. She was indeed beautiful. Perfect. The so-called perfection could be described with any beautiful word, but no beautiful word was enough to describe it. Her face was exquisite and sharp. Every line and every detail of her body was flawless. Dressed in simple yet elegant white clothes, she stood there as if her entire body was glowing. Noble and holy, cold and pure, she was devastatingly beautiful, like a grand and magnificent dream. Her voice was light, clear and soft. He has always been mine. Qin Weibai was silent for a while. Then he nodded. That's right, he's yours. She looked into her eyes. So, do you love him? A hint of confusion appeared in the woman's sparkling eyes. I don't know. She moved her feet lightly and sat on the sofa at the side. A book was placed next to the sofa. It was neither thin nor thick, and its cover was a vast expanse of white. Her slender fingers took the book and opened it. The handwriting inside was not printed, but handwritten. The handwriting was delicate, and every stroke was carefully written. She lowered her head to look at the book in her hands, lost in thought. Everyone has a story, so everyone is a story. Qin Weibai said softly, putting everyone's story into one story is the whole world. But this is not my world. The woman raised her head and looked straight into Qin Weibai's eyes. But Tianlon is here. Qin Weibai said softly. The woman stopped talking and lowered her head again, as if she was trying to think. Don't think about it. Qin Weibai chuckled. Perfect. You love him. Her tone was brief, but extremely sure. The woman raised her head and seemed to be a little dissatisfied. Why? Because I love him. Qin Weibai said calmly. You will naturally protect what I love. I'm not your shadow, and I'm not your puppet.
There was a touch of anger in the woman's cold eyes. Qin Weibai looked at her quietly for a long time. The woman met her eyes without dodging. "I'm sorry." Qin Weibai didn't know how much time had passed. It felt like a minute, but it also felt like a lifetime. Qin Weibai spoke softly with an apologetic tone. There was a flash of fear in the eyes of the woman in white. She shook her head subconsciously and stammered, "No, no. You are indeed not my shadow, nor are you my puppet." Qin Weibai said softly, "At least not now. But I am your destiny, and also your guilt. This has long been decided." The woman's breathing gradually quickened. She suppressed her inner emotions, but all her emotions seemed to have reached the critical point. She began to collapse, and her voice also sounded like she was about to cry. "Why? Who knows?" Qin Weibai walked up to her, reached out and gently stroked her soft black hair. She whispered, "In fact, it's not bad. At least you have the qualification to be by his side." A colorful light lit up the room. The sword intent in the nothingness was extremely soft. The soft sword intent wrapped around the woman in white and then Qin Weibai. It seemed to be comforting, but it didn't know who to comfort. The sword body turned slightly, and the slight sound of the sword seemed to be a sigh. The two of them were completely enveloped in the colorful light. One stood and one sat. Both were perfect and flawless. Unparalleled charm? Unparalleled? There was a sudden knock on the door. The woman in white was shocked and subconsciously wanted to stand up to avoid it. "Sit down," Qin Weibai whispered. "Mr. Lin is not an outsider." The woman in white hesitated and slowly sat down. Qin Weibai sat beside her, looked at the door and said, "Please come in." Lin Fengting walked in from the outside with a chuckle. He saw Qin Weibai and the woman in white sitting on the sofa at the first moment. Even Lin Fengting, who had a strong will and had seen too many bizarre things in his life, was stunned for a moment and dazzled. He shook his head subconsciously and carefully looked at the space where the two of them were. He was dumbfounded, and his eyes became extremely strange for a moment. "Qin, this. Lin Fengting's eyes kept glancing around, and he couldn't say a word for a while. He stuttered several times before he managed to calm down. He took a deep breath and said, "This is..." "Let me introduce you." Qin Weibai stood up and whispered, "This is Mr. Lin Fengting, the current patriarch of the Lin clan, and my most respected elder." She paused and said, "The only one." The woman in white stood up subconsciously and bowed slightly to Lin Fengting. In a short time, Lin Fengting's forehead was covered with cold sweat. He waved his hand randomly and stared at the woman in white without caring about politeness. Qin Weibai looked at the woman in front of her with a smile and whispered, "This is... I have my own name." The woman in white suddenly said, "At least now, I have the right to use my own name." The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth twitched, and he looked confused. Qin Weibai nodded and said quietly, "Her name is Xianxia." The family name was not unimportant. But standing in the woman's current position, she had no family name. Xianxia. This name was really worthy of the name. Lin Fengting was silent for a long time, then slowly exhaled and whispered, No wonder." He looked at Qin Weibai with complicated eyes and said, "It's her." Qin Weibai nodded. Lin Fengting didn't know what to say for a moment. He suddenly wanted to drink, but there was no wine here. He had to light a cigarette, take a deep breath, and then said with emotion, "You are simply a miracle." Qin Weibai smiled. The woman in white reached out and took out a piece of gauze. She covered her face with the gauze and left the room with light steps. "She is your real trump card, isn't she?" Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai, and no one knew what kind of emotion was contained in his tone. "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded calmly. Lin Fengting was silent for a while. He seemed to suddenly think of something and said, I just remembered that flaming fire is waiting outside. It seems that she wants to make trouble, and she is full of murderous intent." As he said this, he subconsciously wanted to turn around. Qin Weibai had turned on the monitor outside the door and said calmly, "It's okay." A sword light lit up on the monitor outside the door. The sword light was cold and sharp. Flaming fire held the long sword in her hand, and the blade fell steadily on the neck of the woman in white. The supermaster who had the closest relationship with Qin Weibai in Samsara Palace was expressionless, but her eyes were full of murderous intent. "Who the hell are you?"
After the woman in white left Qin Wei Bai, her whole aura seemed to change quietly and became extremely quiet. She looked at Flaming Fire calmly and said with a chuckle, "Who do you think I am? You've seen me before." "I did see you before, but I didn't really see you until today." There was a suppressed rage and panic in Flaming Fire's voice. "Who the hell are you? What do you think?" The woman in white smiled playfully. "Do you really think that I dare not kill you?" Flaming Fire's voice was cold. "Do you really dare to?" The woman in white asked back. Flaming Fire's eyes became sharp, and the long sword suddenly pressed down. The blade cut the skin of the woman in white in an instant, but there was no blood. The white clothes in front of her twisted in a trance and finally became illusory. Flaming Fire raised her head and looked at the door. 10 meters away from her, the woman in white was standing there. What Flaming Fire had just seen was an illusion. Flaming Fire took a deep breath, and her plump chest rose and fell slightly. The woman in white glanced at her and said blandly, "Your sword is good, but your vision is poor." She turned to leave and said slowly, "Let me introduce myself. I am Xianxia." Lin Fengting, who saw this scene through the monitor screen, did not speak for a long time. Qin Wei Bai took the initiative to say, "What can I do for you, sir?" Lin Fengting's heart was in a mess. He managed to sort out his thoughts and said slowly, "Flaming Fire just said that it's about to start?" "Yes." Qin Wei Bai poured a cup of tea for Lin Fengting. "It's time. But in the current situation, where do we start?" Lin Fengting asked. "The situation in Eastern Europe should naturally start from Eastern Europe," Qin Wei Bai said calmly. Lin Fengting was silent for a while, and then tentatively said, "The chaos in Eastern Europe began with the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance. The base alliance is not far from here. Their headquarters can be said to be here." Qin Wei Bai whispered, "Since the chaos started here, it will end here. Let's start with the Polar Ground Alliance." Lin Fengting took a deep look at her and did not speak. "If I say that Sir is my most respected elder, will you believe me?" Qin Wei Bai suddenly asked. "Of course not." Lin Fengting laughed. "Boss Qin, what kind of person do you think so highly of me?" "There must be a reason. Because of your friendship, because of the saint of the Lin clan." Qin Wei Bai finished a cup of tea, stood up, and said slowly, "I don't know the result of this battle. I want to ask you something." Lin Fengting nodded. "Go ahead. If I die, everything in the Lin clan for 20 years can be handed over to Xianxia. I only ask for a cemetery. Then my ashes can be buried on the hill behind the flowing light waterfall of the Lin clan." Qin Wei Bai whispered. Lin Fengting's face changed, and his eyes were a little bitter. "If I am lucky enough to survive," Qin Wei Bai laughed. "At that time please take me away, sir." "Leave. Leave." It was normal to leave. Qin Wei Bai's voice was also very ordinary, but Lin Fengting heard a touch of determination. Lin Fengting stood there without saying a word. "I'll take it as a yes," Qin Wei Bai whispered. She left the room with the sword in the void. "Where are you going?" Lin Fengting asked. "Reki City." Qin Wei Bai's voice was calm and distant. Lin Fengting walked to the window and looked at the night rain outside. Under the polar night, whether it was noon or late at night, it was night and heavy rain outside the window. The darkness gradually became deeper. Lin Fengting could already see the end of everything. That was the end of the old era. It was coming to an end. There must be an end. Chapter 551. The rain beat on the car window, and the sound was messy and hurried. The atmosphere in the car was depressing and dull. Li Huaqing looked at the scenery outside the window with a smile. Through the rain, the scenery was blurred, and his eyes were a little blurred. "Your Highness, Mr. President, shall we go straight back to the hotel?" Rieker sat in the passenger seat and turned around to ask. Under normal circumstances, when the president of Jianghu State visited Wulan State, he naturally had to stay in the office of the president temporarily. But now the office of the president had become a ruin, and only Wang Tianzong's room was still intact. Wulan State could only temporarily arrange the distinguished guests of Jianghu State in the hotel. Li Huaqing sensitively noticed the order of Rieker's address. He smiled and said softly, "I'm a guest. I'm here for a lot of things, but not much."
Mr. Prime Minister, we must have a good chat when we have time. Of course. Riker nodded quickly, and thoughts kept turning in his mind. Li Huaqing only had 5 days to stay in Wulong State, and the other 2 days had to travel to the other 4 countries. Time was very tight. This was his first day. Li Huaqing had a reason to do a lot of things, such as arranging a meeting with the high level of Wulong State and signing the agreement as soon as possible. He also wanted to see Wang Tianzong, who was imprisoned in the office of the president, or visit the Snowdance Corps. In addition, Wulong State also prepared a very high-level banquet. The theme of the banquet was the future development of Eastern Europe. As Jianghu State's position in Wulong State gradually stabilized, the general trend of the whole Eastern Europe gradually stabilized. Everyone knew that if they wanted to survive in Eastern Europe and live well in the future, they had to depend on Jianghu State. Therefore, at this banquet, Wulong State sent invitations to countless families and groups throughout Eastern Europe. At the same time, the delegation brought by Li Huaqing also participated in the banquet. This was the first large-scale banquet held by the forces of Jianghu State and Eastern Europe. To some extent, it could almost determine the pattern of Eastern Europe for at least decades. This could be said to be the most important thing. But the funny thing was that the time of the banquet had not been accurately set yet. Riker had to wait for Li Huaqing's nod. He thought for a moment and said tentatively, "Mr. President, here's the thing. Wulong State has prepared a very grand welcome banquet. Tonight I don't know. Put it off for the time being." Li Tianlan suddenly said, "Tomorrow night." Rick was stunned. He subconsciously wanted to nod, but he felt that something was wrong. He could only continue to look at Li Huaqing, but his eyes were obviously a little perfunctory. Li Huaqing's smile remained unchanged. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "Tianlan, do you have a different opinion?" Li Tianlan looked at the wind and rain outside the window. Under the wind and rain, Reki City was desolate. On that day, his sword lit up in front of the Caesar Hotel and tore up half of the city. The sword was 10,000 meters long, and the damage left in the city had not been repaired yet. At this time, Wulong State was much more lively, but there were still some traces of the war. The Snowdance Corps has 20,000 people. Li Tianlan said calmly, "From I'm to here, more than 2,000 soldiers have fallen. We marched all the way, covering a distance of hundreds of miles, and stained with blood all the way. On the night we beat back the dark forces, more than 1,200 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps fell in this city. We can achieve what we have now because the Snowdance Corps has paid nearly 4,000 lives." Rick's face was a little pale, and he was fidgeting. Li Tianlan's voice became calmer and calmer. Whether it was an invincible realm expert or the coalition forces of other countries, the Snowdance Corps has never retreated. We fought all the way from Im to Reki City. There was no deserter in the Snowdance Corps. They all died in a dignified battle, so they are all martyrs. This city and this country will be engraved with the brand of Jianghu State in the future. But no one should forget everything here. It has been dyed red by the blood of the martyrs of Jianghu State. He turned to look at Li Huaqing and said calmly, "Mr. President, you shouldn't forget." Li Huaqing was not embarrassed. Instead, he looked solemn. He looked at Li Tianlan, nodded solemnly, and said, "I think I know what I should do today." He glanced at Rick and said gently, "Mr. Prime Minister, let's go to the station of the Snowdance Corps now and inform the rear vehicles. All the members of the delegation have to go." Rick smiled bitterly and nodded. In fact, when the president of Jianghu State visited Wulong State, everything was arranged in advance. However, there was a small disagreement between Rick and Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's meaning was very simple. On the first day of Li Huaqing's arrival in Wulong State, he had to visit the Snowdance Corps. The ashes of nearly 4,000 martyrs had not yet been buried, and the star flag of Jianghu State had already flown up in the Hero Square in the center of Reki City. For Li Tianlan, it was his most important thing to bury thousands of martyrs. However, Rick also had his own pressure. Now the entire top management of Wulong State, and even the interest class of the whole Eastern Europe, hoped that the dinner could be held as soon as possible. The pressure Rick was under could be imagined. After weighing the pros and cons, he put the dinner first and the memorial service later. In this way, Li Tianlan might not like it, but Rick believed that he could explain it. However, Rick glanced at Li Tianlan and sighed softly in his heart. He picked up the walkie-talkie and began to instruct the motorcade to turn around. The Snow Dance Corps was still temporarily stationed in the parade square in front of the office of the president. When the luxurious motorcade drove into the square, all the top management of the Snow Dance Corps had arrived. The soldiers, injured or not, were all gathered in the square. When Li Huaqing got out of the car, there were only a little more than 10,000 elites stationed in Reki City now. They raised their hands and saluted at the same time. The wind and rain were messy, but a whistling sound broke out in the square because of the tens of thousands of people raising their hands. In an instant, it seemed that even the wind and rain between heaven and earth had become fierce. Li Tianlan followed Li Huaqing. The top management of the Snow Dance Corps came over. Cool breeze and drifting clouds stood on the left and right. Standing in the middle of them was Tribulation, who had just come out of the hospital. Tribulation's body was still weak and his face was pale, but his body was as sharp as a sword. Li Huaqing shook hands with him and said gently, "How's your injury?" "I'm fine." Tribulation's voice was clear and indifferent. Such an occasion was obviously not suitable for detailed discussion. He pointed to the temporary high platform in the center of the square and said softly, "President, please." Li Huaqing took a deep breath, looked at the soldiers of Jianghu State who raised their hands and saluted him, and strode to the high platform. There were no flowers on the high platform, only a microphone. Li Huaqing stood on it and was instantly drenched by the wind and rain. Li Huaqing held the microphone, his eyes calm and dignified. The next second, his voice resounded throughout the square and the whole world. "You are all heroes of Jianghu State, the pride of Jianghu State. I am Li Huaqing. Today, at this moment, I promise you in the name of the President of Jianghu State that Jianghu State will never let down any martyr or soldier. In this war, whether survivors or victims, Jianghu State is proud of you. Today, I am here with you, to send all the martyrs on their way." In the wind and rain, Li Huaqing's voice was clear and loud. This speech of less than 10 minutes had no passion, no blood, only calm and solemnity. In the square, countless members of the Snow Dance Corps began to turn and walk to the Hero Square in the center of the city. Li Huaqing walked down the high platform, looked at the empty office of the president, and looked at the only intact room in sight. He was silent for a while. "Let's go and see Tianzong." He looked at Li Tianlan and said calmly. It was not a question. Li Tianlan nodded and led the way. At the funeral of the Snow Dance Corps, there had to be a president and a sword emperor. There had to be a sword emperor. Wang Tianzong was still practicing calligraphy. Everything outside seemed to have no effect on him. He stood in front of the table with a pen, so focused. When Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing came in, he did not look up and just said casually, "You're here." "I just arrived." Li Huaqing looked around with a chuckle and said, "It seems that you're doing well here. It's good to be able to cultivate one's body and mind." Wang Tianzong spoke calmly and wrote calmly. A lot of rice paper had been scattered in the room. It was densely packed, and the strokes were light and restrained. At the end of each stroke, there was a character. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the countless rice papers full of handwriting. There was clearly no sword intent around him, but the power in each stroke made him feel as if he couldn't breathe. His gaze fell on the last piece of calligraphy. Wang Tianzong's last stroke was very short. "How's my handwriting?" he asked softly. "Good handwriting." Li Tianlan did not hesitate. He nodded directly and said affirmatively. "Good handwriting?" Wang Tianzong smiled and suddenly waved the pen in his hand. One word was like a sword. In an instant, Wang Tianzong seemed to wave a sword in front of Li Tianlan. Everything in front of him disappeared in front of Li Tianlan. The house, the president, and the sword emperor completely disappeared. There was only one sword left in his sight. There was no sword energy or killing intent. It was light and dignified, pure sword. Li Tianlan suddenly closed his eyes. His eyes seemed to be stimulated by something, and tears kept flowing. Wang Tianzong's voice sounded in his ear. "Your sword is very important to my achievements today." Li Tianlan laughed self-deprecatingly. That night, he and Wang Tianzong fought across half of the city, but the fundamental purpose was to mislead Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong was not misled. Instead, he completed the sword and completely completed his sword intent. Li Tianlan opened his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's eyes were gentle and deep, like the sky and the sea, unfathomable. You flatter me, Li Tianlan said calmly. That's the truth. Wang Tianzong turned back, picked up the calligraphy, and said quietly, in return, this calligraphy is for you. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the calligraphy in Wang Tianzong's hand. There was rice paper everywhere in the room, and Wang Tianzong's notes were everywhere. But the notes were not the same. In other words, they were decreasing. Wang Tianzong's first stroke was full of hundreds of words, and the fewer the words were at the end. At this moment, there were only 2 sentences left in Wang Tianzong's hand. Each stroke was simple but majestic. The signature was Beihai Tianzong. There was no surname. With Beihai, there was no need for a surname. Li Tianlan stared at the handwriting in front of him. 2 simple sentences, but they showed the spirit of the Sword Emperor. The unparalleled sword in the world. I am the most ambitious person in history. Between the strokes, the sword intent formed a storm and completely swallowed Li Tianlan. I am the most ambitious person in history. What a peerless sword. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he said in a hoarse voice, perfect. Chapter 552. For Wulan State, the hero square in Reki City had been endowed with a lot of sacred meaning since the founding of the country. This was the resting place of heroes and the origin of countless epic legends. There were countless monuments in the huge hero square, and each monument represented a soul-stirring story. This was the most sacred place in Reki City, and it was also the cemetery chosen by Li Tianlan for the victims of the Snowdance Corps. It was raining heavily and the sky was dark. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps had completely surrounded the hero square. There were 3 extremely tall flagpoles in the center of the square. The star flag of Jianghu State was hung on the highest flagpole. Even in the heavy rain, it was still flying. A little lower than the star flag was the flag of Wulan State, and the flagpole on the left side of the star flag was still empty. Cool breeze and drifting cloud, dressed in military uniform, stood under the flagpole, holding a scarlet military flag and standing solemnly. The usually quiet and elegant hero square had been completely replaced by a warm scarlet color. The intense scarlet color covered the center of the square, and even the monuments around it had become pale under the illumination of the intense color. That was the military flag of the Snowdance Corps, which was made by Prime Minister Rieker himself. The pattern of the military flag was simple and clear. An extremely sharp golden long sword was outlined on the scarlet base. Golden spots of light were dancing around the long sword, like flying snow, flames, and falling blood. This was the military flag that Wulan State had started making a few days ago. It was nearly thousands of meters long and wide. At this time, the huge scarlet flag was spread on the hero square. This scarlet color seemed to be integrated with heaven and earth. All the experts above the fire-flaming realm of the Snowdance Corps gathered around the huge military flag. There were more than 10,000 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps, and there were actually many experts in the fire-flaming realm. However, the military flag, which almost covered the entire square, was so big that even if all the experts in the fire-flaming realm stood there, they still seemed extremely sparse. But in terms of function, hundreds of experts in the fire-flaming realm were enough. In the strong wind and heavy rain, every expert in the fire-flaming realm was controlling his own power. The surging heat waves completely dispelled the chill between heaven and earth and evaporated the rain. In the rainy weather, the whole square was dry. The military flag of the Snowdance Corps was still scarlet and unstained by dust. Under this huge military flag, the ashes of nearly 4,000 people who had sacrificed their lives were quietly placed. The ashes were light, but for Jianghu State, they weighed more than anything else. From the high-level members of the Snowdance Corps to the soldiers, all stood quietly in every corner of the square. There was no wind or rain, no cold or sound here. It was so quiet that it seemed to be frozen. When Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan came to the hero square, they saw such a quiet and almost eternal scene. Wang Tianzong, who had walked out of the office of the president, stood not far from the 2 of them. Looking at this scene, he narrowed his eyes. I should have come here earlier. Li Huaqing watched this scene quietly. He was silent for a long time before he spoke softly. It's not too late. Li Tianlan looked at the military flag below and said calmly, Thank you. Li Huaqing took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said, Thank you for letting me come here.
As the president of Jianghu State, it would be a sin for me to come here 1 minute late, let alone 1 day late.
A hero's soul must not be desecrated.
He looked at the hero square, which was so calm that it was almost frozen, and said in a deep voice,
I only know that many people here died unjustly. Li Tianlan said blandly, they are the most elite soldiers of Jianghu State.
Jianghu State is the most powerful country in the world, so they are the most elite soldiers in the world.
Such soldiers should die on the real battlefield, in the fight with other forces.
That's a worthy death.
Li Huaqing did not speak. Li Tianlan's tone was low.
But some of them are not. They did die in the war.
But in the war, some people forgot their position. Mr. President, does it make sense to die like this? Li Huaqing still did not speak. He could not express his opinion. The Wang family of Beihai had a strong foundation. However, the Devil Troop had always been the deepest hidden trump card of the Wang family of Beihai. No one could even have definite evidence to prove that the Devil Troop did exist. But there was no doubt that they were powerful. The trial day happened overnight.
The Devil Troop seriously injured Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, Situ Tsongyue, destroyed the holy punishment of Void, and killed Cass Rotter, the god of war of Star State.
No matter what the process was, the results and achievements were real. They were extremely brilliant. Everyone was shocked by the incredible combat capability of the Devil Troop.
But only a few people recalled that when the Devil Troop created such a result that night, how many troops and allies of Jianghu State died in the hands of the Devil Troop?
But there was no evidence. Even now, no one could prove that the Devil Troop belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. On the surface, Wang Tianzong was imprisoned by Li Tianlan in the office of the president that night. The power of the Wang family of Beihai did not appear on any side of the battlefield. Under such circumstances, even if Li Huaqing was dissatisfied, how could he express his opinion? Li Tianlan did not expect Li Huaqing to express his opinion.
He just looked ahead and said calmly, I will investigate it to the end.
These are my soldiers.
As long as I am alive, I will give them an explanation.
My position is in Jianghu State and the Snowdance Corps. I will make anyone who targets the Snowdance Corps pay a heavy price. Li Huaqing subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong stood aside, looking as usual. Li Tianlan did not say much and walked to the huge military flag in the square. Behind the three of them, more and more people appeared.
Men and women, old and young. There were nearly hundreds of people. These were the members of the delegation brought by Li Huaqing this time, and they would also become the backbone of dividing the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries. Their achievements today were inextricably linked to the sacrifices of the Snowdance Corps. It was reasonable for them to come. On the other side of the crowd, Rieker led a group of high-level officials of Wulon State and quietly watched Li Tianlan, who was getting closer and closer.
Rieker, who now held the power of the president as the prime minister, had a complicated look in his eyes. Looking at the ashes under the military flag, at Li Tianlan, and at the countless monuments on the hero square around him, he suddenly felt sad. Not for Jianghu State, not for the Snowdance Corps, but for himself and Wulon State. Maybe there was no Wulon State anymore. The real Wulon State would become a thing of the past from today on. Just like this hero square, the legends would be forgotten little by little. This place would become the resting place of new heroes, the land of heroes of Jianghu State. Maybe in a few months or years, the stories on every monument here would disappear, and some well-known heroic deeds would be erased from the textbooks of Wulon State. The heroic deeds of the Snowdance Corps would appear in new textbooks and in various media and public opinions. In another 20 or 30 years, these ashes would become real heroes, and the heroes who really belonged to Wulon State would be completely annihilated. It was so cruel.
In a real invasion, the losers would be robbed not only of their interests, but also of their culture, traditions, ideas, and even beliefs.
Everything would be obliterated, replaced, and completely subverted silently and quietly.
Rieker walked to Li Tianlan's side and said with some difficulty, Your Highness, shall we start now?
Li Tianlan nodded. Rieker turned around and made a gesture.
In front of the flagpole in the center of the square, Cool Breeze, who was holding the flag of the Snowdance Corps, suddenly raised the flag in his hand.
The flag slowly rose in Drifting Cloud's hand.
The national anthem of Jianghu State resounded throughout the hero square, throughout Reki City, and throughout Wulon State. At this moment, in every city and every corner of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, schools,
businesses, governments, everyone was mourning and praying. The lingering national anthem was loud and passionate. The elites of the snow dance corps in the square moved. The huge military flag on the ground was lifted little by little. The soldiers of the snow dance corps carefully picked up the urns one by one and put them into the pit dug nearby. The content of the monument on the square would be gradually replaced, and the lives of all the victims would be engraved on the monument. Li Tianlan and even Li Huaqing picked up the cinerary casket and gently put it in. The wind and rain continued. The singing became more and more majestic. Tens of thousands of soldiers of the snow dance corps raised their guns at the same time. The sound of gunfire roared in the city and surged into the sky. Li Tianlan, dressed in a marshal's uniform, was the first to pick up the shovel and silently buried the earth in the roar of gunfire. The national anthem slowly stopped. The sound of gunfire disappeared. Tens of thousands of elites of the snow dance corps began to gather together again. The military song that once belonged to the Border Control Corps sounded in the square. The tune was leisurely, not sad, only a touch of pride and nostalgia. There were new graves everywhere in the hero square. Perhaps a long time later, the new graves here would also become flat and become a square again. But as long as Li Tianlan was still alive, as long as the Li family was still there, it would always be the most sacred place in the whole of Wulon State and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. In the singing, the old era of Wulon State was completely buried. Li Huaqing, with a solemn face, raised his hand to salute. All the soldiers of the snow dance corps raised their hands to salute at the same time. Wang Tianzong also raised his hand. Only Li Tianlan didn't. Under everyone's gaze, Li Tianlan slowly took a step forward. There was a vast expanse of new graves. His eyes were in a trance for a moment, and his knees bent slightly. In the eyes of the world, he knelt down in front of the new graves. In an instant, tens of thousands of soldiers of the snow dance corps suddenly fell silent. Li Huaqing's face changed slightly, and he subconsciously said, "Marshal Li, what are you doing?" Wang Tianzong's eyes had narrowed tightly. Li Tianlan shook his head and said calmly, "As I said, some brothers here died unjustly. Today, I swear in front of all the brothers that some people have to pay the price for doing something wrong. I will seek justice for them and let them die a worthy death." He lowered his body and his head hit the rain-soaked floor heavily. Once, twice, 3 times. Heaven and earth were silent. All the soldiers of the snow dance corps looked at this scene in a daze. At this moment, there was no Li Huaqing or Wang Tianzong in their eyes. There was only the figure kneeling and kowtowing. That was their marshal. Li Tianlan kowtowed 3 times heavily and slowly got up. Wang Tianzong's face suddenly changed. He raised his head and looked around. Li Tianlan straightened up. As if heaven and earth corresponded, light suddenly appeared in the dark sky. The quiet light enveloped the whole square. It was a riot of colors. The light appeared from all directions and gathered toward Li Tianlan crazily. Li Tianlan raised his head and was in a daze. He subconsciously stretched out his palm. The outstretched palm seemed to be pressed down by something in the nothingness. In an instant, the colorful light surged and shot wildly. Endless colorful light rushed out of the light and went straight up into the sky. The wind and rain all over the sky dissipated. Li Tianlan stood there. His hand grasped a rainbow, vast and boundless, incomparably dazzling. It was like a miracle. Chapter 553. Even if Wulon State and even Reki City disappeared from the world a long time later, the scene in the Hero Square on the afternoon of August 23rd would leave its own color in the long history of the flow of time. The colorful light surged wantonly, almost covering the entire square. The rainbow connecting the heaven and the earth bloomed in Li Tianlan's hands. At this moment, his whole body was shining. This was a miracle. It would also become a legend in the future. Everyone was staring at this scene in a daze. The light that covered the heavy rain was extremely gorgeous, mysterious, and full of sharp majesty. No one could explain such a scene. Because of the unknown, everyone was in awe. Was it a blessing from heaven? Was it destiny? Was it destiny? This scene, which was filled with a mysterious flavor, filled everyone's heart. Apart from shock, it brought them more shock. Wang Tianzong did not look at the rainbow in Li Tianlan's hands. His body turned slowly, and he stared intently in all directions. Naturally,
He would not think that these lights were a gift from heaven. The light was still sharp in the slight flow. All the light was sword light. The sword light was sharp but did not hurt people. It silently spread all over the square. This was not something that a human could do at all. Wang Tianzong was sure of this. He could not do it himself, and no one could do it. Everything in front of him was like the light of a sword itself. If such a sword existed, what kind of sword would it be? Wang Tianzong frowned. The sword light kept lingering in his sight. He seemed to detect a familiar taste, but it was hard to describe. He glanced at the snow dance corps around him. The snow dance corps was silent. Everyone was looking at Li Tianlan quietly. At this moment, there was no one in their eyes, not even the sword light. From Wang Tianzong's sight, the eyes of the snow dance corps were all without the slightest rational fanaticism and firmness. Wang Tianzong's heart sank. In the end, he remained silent. At the same time, Wang Tianzong was silent, but Gu Xingyun, who was far away in Jianghu state, could not help bursting out. Preposterous. Simply preposterous. What's the meaning of this? Li Tianlan is the commander of the Snow Dance Corps and the Marshal of Jianghu State. The Snow Dance Corps is the elite corps of Jianghu State, not the private army of the Li family. Why does he kneel? Why does he kneel? Was he qualified? Buying people's hearts, building up troops in Eastern Europe, and having wild ambitions, you should be punished. In the cold and spacious hall of Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun looked at the picture on TV and roared hysterically. His eyes were scarlet, and he stared at Li Tianlan as if he wanted to swallow him alive. To win people's hearts, that bitch Qin Wei Bai is helping him behind the scenes. If he kneels down together with her, it's impossible for us to fight for the Snow Dance Corps. Gu Qianchuan stood beside Gu Xingyun with a pale face and said in a gloomy tone. After he escaped from Beijiang, he did not return to Kunlun City until yesterday. After the battle with Li Tianlan, the injuries he had suppressed relapsed in Beijiang. Now, Gu Qianchuan was not even as good as Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun stared at the TV and was silent. Li Tianlan's kneeling was completely inappropriate. Through the TV, Gu Xingyun didn't know what Li Tianlan said, but no matter what he said, his kneeling seemed to have ulterior motives in the eyes of others. However, the colorful light that rose into the sky later gave this matter a great mythical color. It was not until this moment that Gu Xingyun finally noticed something from Li Tianlan's every move. That was luck. Li Tianlan's every move, everything, and all the results represented the majestic and almost irresistible luck. Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan looked at each other and saw deep helplessness in each other's eyes. Do you still have strength left? Gu Qianchuan suddenly asked. Gu Xingyun was stunned, and then he shook his head with a bitter smile. What's the point? The moment Li Tianlan knelt down, Gu Xingyun really had a desperate desire to kill him. His kneeling made the Snow Dance Corps completely surrender. But in the end, no matter how strong the Snow Dance Corps was, there were less than 20,000 people now. What made Gu Xingyun most nervous was the signal brought by Li Tianlan's kneeling and the relationship between him and the Dongqing clan. Now there was definite news that the Dongqing clan had completely put its future on Li Tianlan. Even Zhou Yuanshan, who was likely to reach the top, would wholeheartedly assist Li Tianlan. If Zhou Yuanshan reached the top 20 years later, he could guarantee the prestige of the giant group for decades to come. But if Li Tianlan became the chosen one, he could make the Dongqing clan the second Wang family of Beihai. The Dongqing clan naturally knew which was more important. Li Tianlan's kneeling showed his attitude toward the Dongqing clan, which was undoubtedly what many people in the giant group liked. It also meant that it would be smoother for Li Tianlan to take over the authority of Dongqing Wudi in the future. A Li family that controlled the giant group might not be as powerful as the Li family in its heyday, but its strength was directly related to Li Tianlan's strength. Li Tianlan now had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. What if he officially broke through to the Invincible Realm in a few years? With the potential and combat capability that Li Tianlan showed now, once he officially entered the Invincible Realm, Gu Xingyun did not dare to say that he would be his opponent even without stabilizing his realm. Gu Qianchuan asked him if he still had strength left at this time, undoubtedly to let Gu Xingyun kill him at all costs. Even if I have strength left, can I really sneak into Reki City and kill him? After all, he is the Marshal of Jianghu State. Gu Xingyun said. Why not? Gu Qianquan said quietly. Gu Xingyun raised his head in astonishment. In his sight, Gu Qianquan's pale face was calm. Gu Xingyun also understood. Why couldn't he kill him? Now Gu Xingyun was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he was seriously injured, his realm was there. As long as he had strength left, he could kill him. As long as Gu Xingyun was willing to pay the price. The god of war of Jianghu state killed the marshal of Jianghu state. In any case, Gu Xingyun could not escape the responsibility. Even if he did not have to pay with his life, he was bound to be imprisoned for life. But if Li Tianlan died, Kunlun City would have time. Even if Kunlun City lost Gu Xingyun, it still had Gu Qianquan. Kunlun City had been rooted in Jianghu state for more than 20 years, and the special warfare group had gradually become mature. As long as there were another 20 years, even if the high-level officials of Jianghu state were completely neutral, Kunlun City would have the confidence to protect itself in front of a behemoth like the Wang family of Beihai. Therefore, Gu Qianquan asked Gu Xingyun to sacrifice himself. For Kunlun City. It's a matter of life and death. Gu Qianquan laughed at himself. He had no strength left, and his realm was not high enough. Even if he could move, he would not be Li Tianlan's opponent. Gu Xingyun was silent for a long time, then shook his head and said, "I can't move." Gu Qianquan looked at him and did not speak for a long time. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the light in his hand. Others were shocked, angry, admiring, and thoughtful. But his whole consciousness had been completely occupied by the sword light in front of him. The sword light with extremely pure sword intent wrapped him up. The light formed by the sword intent and the sword chi appeared in an extremely calm manner. It was completely unfolded in front of him. It was so strange and so familiar. It seemed familiar. Li Tianlan felt the emotion. It was light and strong emotion. It was joy, intimacy, excitement, approval, docility, and dependence. The sword light in front of him seemed to be alive, constantly jumping in Li Tianlan's hand. He had a sword in his hand. Li Tianlan could not see what the sword looked like, but he could clearly feel that the sword seemed to whisper something in his hand. "This is the real peerless sword." Wang Tianzong's voice sounded beside him. Sword Emperor, who had been incompatible with the Snowdance Corps, walked to Li Tianlan's side and looked at the light in his hand seriously. There was a little joy in his tone. "What do you see?" Li Tianlan asked softly. "Nothingness," Wang Tianzong said calmly, "but it's very real." He could not see the sword either. But between nothingness and reality, what he felt was the purest sword intent. A real sword should be like this. So should martial arts. A real sword should be alive and have a soul. It could perfectly carry anyone and any level of sword energy. The invincible sword. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. It stands here and doesn't need to be controlled. Its sword energy is already equivalent to a peak invincible realm expert. Li Tianlan's expression became a little strange. Now in the whole dark world, there were only 5 confirmed experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Tianzong, deity, Lin Fengting, the master of Samsara Palace, and Sis. Should this sword of nothingness be added now? If this sword was ranked on the divine list, wouldn't it be ranked above Gu Xingyun? Li Tianlan did not find it funny. Instead, he felt a little cold. If so, what kind of sword was it? Who made it? The sword in nothingness seemed to feel Li Tianlan's mood. The sword light trembled slightly in his hand, with a little grievance and dissatisfaction, like a child acting coquettishly. Li Tianlan was a little speechless. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. He also did not know what kind of sword it was, but he was sure that even if the coldness of 9 states was successfully cast with a human emperor, its spirituality would not reach this level. "Your Excellency, can you show up?" Wang Tianzong looked at the void with a serious expression and asked. His tone was very respectful. Not because of its strength, but because the sword itself was a miracle. With this sword, no weapon in the world could shake its position as the first divine weapon, whether it was the murderous weapon Listen to the Sea, or even the coldness of 9 states. The sword in nothingness did not respond, nor did it have any emotion. Wang Tianzong waited quietly. With his current strength, he might be able to try to forcibly control this sword. But what could a sword equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm do even if he controlled it? It did not belong to him. If he really held it in his hand, Not only could he not use it, but it was equivalent to carrying a time bomb. The colorful light slightly fluctuated in Li Tianlan's hand. Some sword light wrapped around Wang Tianzong's body, with faint emotions. That emotion was not hostility, killing intent, or disgust. There was intimacy, but with a touch of complexity and helplessness. The sword whistling in the void seemed to be a sigh. All the emotions slowly disappeared, completely converged, and returned to nothingness. At this moment, it was no longer a life, but a sword, a pure sword. The sword was in Li Tianlan's hand. Wherever the long sword pointed, the tip of the sword pointed. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his palm. The seven-colored radiance that filled the sky instantly boiled. In the void, the sword continued to rise, faster and faster, disappearing into the distance in an instant. The seven-colored light slowly dissipated. The wind and rain did not fall for a while. There was no sunlight between the heavens and the earth. It was murky and pure. "What do you think?" Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He and Wang Tianzong were enemies, but in the field of sword intent, only Li Tianlan was qualified to discuss swordsmanship with Wang Tianzong. Even if they were enemies, they would be lonely when they didn't see each other. Wang Tianzong felt the direction where the sword light disappeared and was silent for a long time. He thought of the coldness of 9 states cast by the Wang family of Beihai. The coldness of 9 states was not as good as this sword. It was inserted into the spirituality, but it was lacking in the sword qi. This was because compared to the one who had just left, the coldness of the 9 states was only born from the heart. It did not have enough spirituality or sword qi. If he became a chosen one and swept through the dark world with the coldness of the 9 states, when the coldness of the 9 states fully matured, it might not be much weaker than that sword. The most important thing was, Wang Tianzong only wanted a sword. He wanted a sword that could bear his sword intent. The coldness of the 9 states could do it. The other things were no longer important. He shook his head and said slowly, "After all, it's just a foreign object." The constantly converging sword light went all the way to the west and landed on the West Mountain. The so-called West Mountain was a low hillside that surrounded the Hero Square on several sides. Standing on the hillside, one could clearly see everything on the Hero Square. The master of Samsara Palace, who had been rumored to have fallen and had never appeared even on the date of death and the trial day, stood on the hillside and looked at Li Tianlan in the distance in silence. Qin Weibai, who was wearing a gray windbreaker, stood side by side with the master of Samsara Palace, looking more and more beautiful. Flaming fire stood behind them, as quiet as a statue. The sword light that kept returning to nothingness was getting closer and closer. In the nothingness, the sword body hovered around the three of them for a moment and passed by flaming fire. It seemed to hesitate slightly and finally became completely quiet. "It's too early for you to make a move," the master of Samsara Palace said softly. "Have you ever thought that it's not necessarily a good thing to believe in him too early?" "Why not?" Qin Weibai said with a smile. "This kind of timing and occasion is the best." The master of Samsara Palace did not speak for a moment. Her figure was tall and plump. Under the black cloak was an expressionless mask. She was not ugly, but standing in front of Qin Weibai, who was as ethereal as a fairy, she looked ordinary and almost bloated. They were a pair of sisters. When the two stood together, everyone's attention would be attracted by Qin Weibai and thus ignore the master of Samsara Palace. Even if she was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who stood at the peak of the dark world. Qin Weibai looked at her silent figure. Her eyes were in a trance, and she was lost in thought for a moment. "You're not reconciled?" the master of Samsara Palace suddenly said. Her voice sounded a little low under the mask. "No." Qin Weibai's voice became cold. The master of Samsara Palace seemed unwilling to continue this topic. She looked at Li Tianlan in the distance and said blandly, "You want to mold him into a supreme god, but it's too early now. He's not strong enough. A god is perfect and supreme, without any flaws. Now he's still too weak. Have you ever thought that the higher you push him, the more he can't afford any failure? It's true for him, and it's also true for his subordinates." "What's the matter?" Qin Weibai asked back. "Does it matter?" Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace took a deep breath. "Wang Tianzong, deity, Lin Fengting, and even me, who isn't stronger than him? The chaos in East Island isn't over yet. Now,
Qin Weibai suddenly interrupted the master of Samsara Palace. It's over. At least for him, it's over. The next final battle has nothing to do with him. The master of Samsara Palace couldn't speak for a moment. Qin Weibai took 2 steps forward and opened her hands, as if she was embracing the sky. Her figure was so delicate, so perfect. I could have changed a lot of things. She said softly, of course, I also changed a lot of things, but I'm not a savior. I just want my man to go higher and make his path easier. From the very beginning, even before the final battle of Chongdao, in our plan, Tianlong wouldn't be in the final battle of Eastern Europe. Tianlong will not be in the final battle in Eastern Europe. He has done a good job in Eastern Europe. What belongs to him is over. But you know him. The master of Samsara Palace said blandly. In the final battle, both you and I will be there. Tianlong won't stay out of it. She looked at Qin Weibai's back, and her voice was as sharp as a knife. You don't have any means to persuade him. So, how are you going to let him leave the battlefield of the final battle? Qin Weibai's figure trembled violently. He could have left. Qin Weibai's voice suddenly sounded a little agitated. If everything goes well, in a few days, he will leave with Li Huaqing, return to Jianghu State, and go to Tiannan to develop. When he hears the news, it will be too late. But Jiang Shangyu is missing. The master of Samsara Palace said, whether he intentionally disappeared or not, the direct result of his disappearance is that Li Tianlong can't leave Eastern Europe for the time being. His disappearance directly ruined your plan. Qin Weibai's body trembled slightly. So, how are you going to keep him out of the battlefield? The master of Samsara Palace asked more and more directly. You do it? Or me? In an instant, Qin Weibai's face lost all the blood and became extremely miserable. I said. Her voice was light, as if she had lost all her soul. I won't say sorry for the second time in my life. So, the master of Samsara Palace asked. There was silence. The silence seemed to have passed for a moment, but it also seemed to be as long as a lifetime. Qin Weibai's voice finally sounded. I'll do it. The master of Samsara Palace sighed softly with mixed feelings. The snow dance corps in the distance began to leave the square. In sight, there were crowds of people everywhere. The master of Samsara Palace hesitated for a moment, walked to Qin Weibai, and patted her on the shoulder. Qin Weibai lowered her head and no longer looked at Li Tianlong or the snow dance corps. Have you ever thought about what he would be like without you and me in this world? The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Qin Weibai's eyes were in a trance, and she said absent-mindedly, what can he do? Without you and me, there will be others to replace us. If he doesn't meet me, he will still enter the Sky Academy. Maybe there will be no final battle of East Island, but he will still rise quickly in the Sky Academy, and then his identity will be exposed. She said quietly in a sad voice. Then, he may enter the Wang family of Beihai because he can't bear the pressure he can't bear at all. He will find his own way to be the chosen one and sweep the dark world with the divine weapon given to him by the Wang family of Beihai. He will meet Phoenix Pavilion, 1 or 2 women he loves deeply, and they also love him deeply, but they are destined to die with each other. Just like Li Kuang-tu, the old things keep reincarnating. He will die under the sword of his woman, and the Li family will disappear completely. His woman may hide her identity, or take revenge for him with his sword. That may be the era of women. The master of Samsara Palace listened to her quietly without saying a word. The former is sad, and the latter is boring. Finally, Qin Weibai concluded. Boring. The master of Samsara Palace's voice was calm. It's really boring. Qin Weibai nodded. Let's go to see Tianlong. The master of Samsara Palace's body hesitated for a moment. Qin Weibai looked down at her clothes. A gray lady's trench coat, a white scarf, a white cotton shirt, black straight pants, and high heels. She never dressed herself up, but any clothes on her had a kind of dazzling brilliance. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said, Let's change clothes and go. The master of Samsara Palace nodded. Okay, let's go back to the hotel first. The Manlasai Hotel has been completely cordoned off. It's the place where Wulon State arranged President Li Huaqing to live. I've booked a room in a nearby hotel. Flaming Fire, who had been silent, suddenly became angry. She took a step forward and looked at Qin Weibai. The master of Samsara Palace didn't say anything.
Qin Weibai nodded and said casually, "Then let's go there directly." Flaming Fire nodded slightly. "The car is already at the foot of the mountain." The three of them slowly went down the mountain along the mountain path. Along the way, Flaming Fire wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Qin Weibai didn't seem to notice Flaming Fire's state. Her steps were light and weak. The master of Samsara Palace quietly reached out and grabbed Qin Weibai's arm. She looked at Flaming Fire and asked aloud, "What do you want to say?" Flaming Fire glanced at the master of Samsara Palace and ignored her. The master of Samsara Palace narrowed her eyes slightly and snorted softly. A black car made in Eastern Europe was parked at the foot of the mountain. The three of them got in the car in silence. Flaming Fire sat in the driver's seat, silent and motionless. Finally, Qin Weibai looked at her and said slowly, "What do you want to ask?" "What clothes do you want to change, boss?" Flaming Fire hesitated for a while and finally asked directly. "Changing clothes is changing clothes. Have you prepared a lot of clothes?" Qin Weibai asked curiously. Flaming Fire turned to look at Qin Weibai's bright and crystal eyes and said stubbornly, "You know what I mean." She paused and continued, "I will never agree." Qin Weibai reached out and tidied the hair in front of Flaming Fire's forehead. She said softly, "Don't think too much." "I didn't think too much." Flaming Fire said quietly, "I just don't agree." She turned to look at the master of Samsara Palace and said with cold eyes, "Why?" The master of Samsara Palace did not speak. Flaming Fire sneered and said, "Do you deserve it?" "Enough." Qin Weibai suddenly opened her mouth and said coldly. Flaming Fire's fierce momentum stagnated for a moment and finally fell silent. "I don't want to go to the hotel." After a long time, Flaming Fire said softly. For some reason, her eyes were slightly red. "You have to let Tianlan see it." Qin Weibai said softly. She touched Flaming Fire's head and said, "Drive." Flaming Fire was silent. From Mormons to Reki City, they took a private plane and didn't stop. The reason for all of this was actually so simple. It didn't matter whether they missed her or not. The important thing was to let Tianlan see it. Look at her. Look at her. And her. Chapter 554. When Eastern Europe was approaching the end, the final maneuver of the two academies in Jianghu State finally came to an end. After the maneuvers, the statistics of credits were handed over to the presidents of the two academies as soon as possible. The presidents of the two academies reported the credits to Kunlun City. After the verification, Kunlun City would distribute a series of rewards and treatments to each force and each young student according to the credits. Then it was the graduation ceremony. The high-level officials and teachers of the two academies would spend a few months summarizing the teaching situation of this year, exchanging experiences, re-rating the strength of each teacher, transferring personnel, rewarding teachers with outstanding achievements in the past 3 years, and formulating the teaching direction and focus of the two academies for the next year. Then it was the annual leave and a short vacation. After the vacation, when the personnel of the two academies were completely stable, the two academies announced the enrollment requirements of the new year. Kunlun City and the Army headquarters jointly issued a document, which was transmitted to the entire military world and the special warfare system. Any young elites who met the enrollment requirements and were interested in entering the two academies would choose the Sky Academy or the Deep Sea Academy. Then the teachers of the two academies would lead teams to various places for the assessment. After the assessment, the new classes of the two academies would officially start again at the end of March or the beginning of April next year, around the Qingming Festival. To some extent, the final result of the last maneuver of the two academies directly affected the direction of the new students' choice and the support of the military and the special warfare system for the two academies. So Zhuanghuayang was very busy. The Sky Academy really shone in this year and completely left the Deep Sea Academy behind. Li Tianlan's rise directly broke the pattern of the young generation, and even the entire Jianghu State experts. The Deep Sea Academy originally had Jiang Shangyu, Dongqing Rushi, and Song Ci. From the beginning, the Deep Sea Academy's glory was far stronger than that of the Sky Academy. But Li Tianlan defeated 3 young chosen ones and many elites in one fell swoop in the final maneuver, which also completely shattered the pride of the Deep Sea Academy. From the beginning to the end of the maneuver, the East Emperor Palace only participated in the team maneuver on the first day, and only Li Tianlan participated. But the credits accumulated by the East Emperor Palace had more than twice that of the second place, the 3000 world. The East Emperor Palace was the force of the Sky Academy, and all this was naturally the glory of the Sky Academy. As the Dean of the Sky Academy, within 24 hours after the maneuver, Zhuang Huayang had been commended many times by the parliament, the cabinet, the military, and Kunlun City. After all, the total credits of the Sky Academy in this maneuver had surpassed that of the Deep Sea Academy. With such a brilliant achievement, the Parliament of Jianghu State almost unanimously approved the appointment of Zhuang Huayang to continue to serve in the Sky Academy. Zhuang Huayang naturally knew the reason. From this moment on, although he was still the backbone of the academics, he had already stepped on the boat of the East Emperor Palace. On the surface, he stayed in the Sky Academy to commend his achievements, but there was more than one kind of commendation. With his age and military rank, the high-level officials of the army headquarters in Kunlun City had talked to him before, hoping that he could serve in the Ministry of National Defense and serve as the deputy minister after this term. In fact, it was tantamount to giving him an idle job in retirement. Of course, this retirement position was what everyone dreamed of, and it might not be worse than now. However, after thinking for a long time, Zhuang Huayang finally expressed the idea of continuing to shine in the Sky Academy. His care for Li Tianlan was well known. Nowadays, the Academy, the Giant Group, and Sai City were very close, and the core figure was Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace. It could be foreseen that as long as Li Tianlan went all the way up in the future, Zhuang Huayang sitting in this position was unlikely to step down. Instead, he would always hold the power of the Sky Academy and attract talents for the East Emperor Palace. The Academy would also intervene in the special warfare system with the rise of the East Emperor Palace's status. The cooperation between the two sides was a complete win-win situation. Zhuang Huayang might have to wait until the East Emperor Palace was strong enough to decide the sensitive position of the Dean of the Sky Academy. But at that time, Li Huaqing had already left the office and gave up the supreme power. The academics, which was in a dormant period, could negotiate with the powerful East Emperor Palace on this issue and find a new direction of cooperation, such as the current governor of Xianxia, Zhou Yuanshan. Knowing his position clearly, Zhuang Huayang naturally knew what he should do. As soon as the maneuver ended, he sent a notice to the East Emperor Palace and invited them to return to the Sky Academy to confirm the future development direction. This matter could even be said to be the most important thing for Zhuang Huayang. For the East Emperor Palace, it was also extremely important. The sun shone in the spacious office. Zhuang Huayang held a list in his hand and looked at it attentively. Sitting opposite Zhuang Huayang, Li Beitian calmly watched Zhuang Huayang frown. After a long time, Zhuang Huayang put down the list in his hand and said slowly, "You actually want all of these people?" There were thousands of students in the two academies, but there were only hundreds of elites who could really enter the eyes of the major forces. The East Emperor Palace naturally had no right to be picky. As a new force, even with Li Tianlan in charge, the scope of the East Emperor Palace's selection of talents was still extremely narrow. The graduates of the two academies were their biggest market. This market was indeed very large. In the eyes of Kunlun City, there were nearly 100 students who applied to join the East Emperor Palace. In the eyes of Wang Qinglei, this list had already exceeded 100 people. But looking at the entire Sky Academy, this year, there were more than 860 students who wanted to join the East Emperor Palace and had submitted applications to the political departments of the two academies. The East Emperor Palace was also generous enough. They wanted to accept more than 800 people without leaving a single one. Zhuang Huayang was a little worried. He took a deep look at Li Beitian and said slowly, "Do you know what this means?" Li Beitian nodded with a smile. In the case of Li Tianlan in Eastern Europe, he had full authority to represent the East Emperor Palace. This decision was made after many internal discussions and communication with various parties. More than 800 people. This is just the combat capability. The East Emperor Palace accepted them. In fact, it is equivalent to accepting their relatives and even their families. There is no shortage of experts on this list, and they also have vassals around them. So if all of them are counted, the East Emperor Palace has accepted at least more than 1,000 students this time. Including their families, the number of people in the East Emperor Palace will even exceed 5,000. Zhuang Huayang said in a deep voice. Any new force had to develop slowly. Even if it was a big gamble, there must be a limit. The current behavior of the East Emperor Palace was completely crazy. To accept so many people in one breath, it needed great financial resources, future potential, and a stable chain of interests. Now, the East Emperor Palace had nothing but potential. Headmaster, we have indeed considered this problem, but at present, it seems that it is not impossible to solve. The new East Emperor Palace will give everyone a huge surprise. Li Beitian said calmly. As for this list, only about 1/10 of the people really enter the headquarters of the East Emperor Palace. The East Emperor Palace will set up a new branch in the near future, and most of the people on the list will develop in the branch. Zhuang Huayang stared at Li Beitian. He even thought that the young man in front of him was crazy. The East Emperor Palace had just been established, and it had not yet stabilized. How could he want to set up a branch? The corner of his mouth moved, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Headmaster, if you have anything to say, you can say it directly. Although we have graduated, we will always be your students. Li Beitian laughed. Zhuang Huayang snorted coldly, stood up, and said, It's nonsense. The East Emperor Palace is in the limelight now. The most important thing to do at present is to keep a low profile. The East Emperor Palace has accepted so many talents at once. Do you really think that other forces have no temper? Bodhisattva? Well, your foundation is not stable, and you start to set up a branch. What kind of institution is this branch? Who will be responsible? Do you think you don't have enough shortcomings? The new branch is called Nightmare Corps. It is probably a strengthened regiment. The East Emperor Palace is the first in this maneuver. With Tianlan's position, we want to fight for A-class authorization for Nightmare Corps. Li Beitian said. Zhuang Huayang took a deep breath and shook his head with a wry smile. Nightmare Corps was also a special warfare legion. The strengthened regiment would have about 3,000 people, and the commander's military rank was at least a colonel. These were easy to deal with. The key was A-class authorization. There were 4 levels of authorization in the special warfare system of Jianghu state. B-class authorization was common, and could be regarded as the basic and middle level. Most small special warfare agencies were B-class authorization. A-class authorization was already a behemoth. They had the power to expand freely in a certain province. The special operations bureaus of each province were all A-class authorization. Originally, the current status of the East Emperor Palace should also give them A-class authorization. To get A-class authorization, the strength must be at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and the military rank of lieutenant general or above. Li Tianlan was now the marshal of Jianghu state. After the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, he returned to China and handed over the position of the commander of the Snowdance Corps, but he was still the marshal. Therefore, the new East Emperor Palace would get S-class authorization, which was on the same level as the regional special warfare headquarters. Its status was equivalent to that of a member of parliament. Above the S-class was the X-class. In the entire Jianghu state, only Kunlun City had the X-class authorization and could expand freely within the territory of Jianghu state. In the current state, an S-class authorization was enough for the East Emperor Palace to digest. Li Beitian even wanted an A-class authorization? Let's not talk about whether you can get the A-class authorization. Even if you get it, who in your East Emperor Palace is qualified to be the commander of this Nightmare Corps? Zhuang Huayang asked seriously. Marshal Li can't do it himself, can he? The strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and the military rank of lieutenant general. Li Beitian was now the second most important person in the East Emperor Palace, but his realm was still some distance from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and his qualifications were not enough to be promoted to lieutenant general. The Li family, Sai City, and Dongqing clan could provide such people, but it was unlikely to get the A-class authorization with these people. In the entire East Emperor Palace, only Li Wangxing, the lieutenant general of Black Tortoise in Jianghu state, was barely qualified. But he was just barely qualified. His military rank was enough, but his strength was slightly poor. And the position of the Terracotta Army could not be easily given up. As for the other one, Dongqing Rushi, her strength was enough, but her strength was not strong enough to be promoted as an exception as Li Tianlan's. And to say the least, even if Li Wangxing and Dongqing Rushi were promoted, their strength was not enough to quell the controversy. At that time, there would be many people who were dissatisfied and challenged. Once they failed, the entire East Emperor Palace would be affected. At present, we have found the candidate for the commander of the Nightmare Corps. He has confirmed that he will join the East Emperor Palace, and I believe that his strength can be promoted and fully recognized by Jianghu state. No one will be bored enough to challenge him. Li Beitian said seriously. Zhuang Huayang thought about it with some doubts and asked, "Where is he?" "He is still with Tianlan in Eastern Europe," Li Beitian said. Zhuang Huayang thought about the young expert who was now with Li Tianlan and said uncertainly, "Dongqing Rushi?" Li Beitian shook his head. "Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou State, Lin Yuxian, the young master of the Lin clan. Is he qualified?" This chapter is purely coded by mobile phone. There is a power outage at home. We said that there would be no electricity at 10 o'clock. If there are any typos, please bear with it. Chapter 555. There was some doubt in Zhuang Huayang's eyes, but it soon turned into surprise. Li Beiqian's words contained too much information and represented too many things. Lin clan, Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou state. Every word was the key of the key. This was also something that Zhongzhou state had been secretly looking forward to for a long time. The Lin clan lived in seclusion. They were far away in Switzerland and had almost never interfered in any affairs of the dark world. In this state, the Lin clan, in the era when experts at the peak of the invincible realm could almost represent everything, was absolutely worth the effort of any force to rope in. Zhongzhou state had also tried several times, but the Lin clan had never given any response. Now that Lin Yuxian joined the East Emperor Palace, it was absolutely a good start. He would serve as the commander of the Nightmare Army, so he must become a citizen of Zhongzhou state and even join the political party of Zhongzhou state. After all, he was the heir of the Lin clan. Even if the Lin clan allowed Lin Yuxian to develop a branch alone, the Lin clan was bound to change its attitude toward Zhongzhou state in the future because of his relationship with the Lin clan. If a behemoth like the Lin clan supported a country with the same voice, it was actually very troublesome. Support at all costs often meant that the supported country had to pay an unimaginable price. For example, no one could deny the great contribution that the Wang family of Beihai and Zhongzhou state brought to Zhongzhou state. But the existence of the Wang family of Beihai often made Zhongzhou state seem very embarrassed. The young master of the Lin clan joined the East Emperor Palace, and the Lin clan had a very important branch in the country. At some point, if the Lin clan's position leaned toward Zhongzhou state, it would have a huge influence. In the eyes of Zhongzhou state, this was a real win-win situation. No wonder. No wonder. Zhuang Huayang muttered to himself and suddenly asked with some uncertainty, "What did Lin Yuxian say?" "He has already shown his attitude by going to Eastern Europe with Tianlan. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he couldn't get away from Eastern Europe, he might have come to meet the headmaster in person today," Li Beitian said with a smile. Zhuang Huayang took a deep look at him and didn't say anything. He understood Lin Yuxian's attitude and naturally understood Li Beiqian's subtext. Didn't it mean that if Lin Yuxian was free, he would represent the East Emperor Palace to discuss the list with Zhuang Huayang today? In other words, in the future sequence of the East Emperor Palace, the first was Li Tianlan, and the real second was Lin Yuxian. Judging from Li Beiqian's current attitude, he wasn't dissatisfied with this. There were only a few cores in the East Emperor Palace. After Li Tianlan, it was Li Beiqian and Dongqing Rushi. They were all experts who were likely to break through and enter the invincible realm. Dongqing Rushi would not fight for anything. If Li Beiqian was willing to give up the position of number 2, Ning Qianqing, who was slightly less talented, and Su Chu would not do anything. Du Hanyin belonged to Sai City, and Wang Yuetong was in an awkward position. In this way, as long as Li Beiqian did not fight for it, the core lineup of the East Emperor Palace would be extremely stable in the future. For anyone looking forward to the future of the East Emperor Palace, this was good news. "I will communicate with the chief immediately. East Emperor Palace will probably get the authorization of the Nightmare Army at the graduation ceremony," Zhuang Huayang said without hesitation, full of confidence. If the commander of the Nightmare Army was not Lin Yuxian, he would not be so confident, and he might not even report it to the higher-ups. But if it was Lin Yuxian, all the problems would be solved. Zhongzhou state was completely willing to make an exception to promote Lin Yuxian. With the status of the Lin clan in the dark world, Zhongzhou state was even willing to pay more. Kunlun city naturally would not like this appointment, but it was impossible to oppose it openly, because it was useless even if it did. If Gu Xingyun really dared to say no, the whole Jianghu state, not to mention the counselors and directors, even the wealthy families who had various cooperation with the Lin clan would teach him what to focus on the overall situation.
Li Beitian laughed. Before he came, he knew this would be the result.
He pointed to the list in Zhuang Huayang's hand and said, "This?
I'll arrange it."
Zhuang Huayang waved his hand and looked at the list in his hand.
"This chapter is not over. Please turn the page."
Among the hundreds of names, the oldest was already 31 years old, and the weakest had crossed the ice-condensing realm, which was the standard for graduation from the East Emperor Palace.
Many of them were not geniuses, but there was still room for improvement. Conservatively speaking, the worst potential could reach the peak of the ice-condensing realm.
From the ice-condensing realm to the fire-flaming realm, to the thunder-shocking realm, and to the half-step invincible realm. The starting point of the East Emperor Palace was unimaginably high, and it had formed its own talent echelon. If Li Tianlan could break through to the invincible realm in a short time, the entire East Emperor Palace would become pivotal in the Dark World. Even now, as long as Li Tianlan came back, the East Emperor Palace could be regarded as a force that no one in Jianghu State could ignore. The most important thing was that it was just the beginning. 3 years later, with Li Tianlan's steady rise in Jianghu State, how many people would want to join the East Emperor Palace when the graduates of the two academies graduated again? And what realm would the people who joined the East Emperor Palace be in 3 years? Zhuang Huayang was a little emotional. Vaguely, he seemed to see a surging tide rolling over from a distance, with a general trend of crushing everything, constantly subverting all the orders of the old era. The younger generation will surpass us in time, he sighed softly.
Headmaster, you flatter me.
Li Beitian smiled implicitly.
If there's nothing else, I should go back.
How could there be nothing else? Zhuang Huayang said helplessly. At the graduation ceremony, you have to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace.
Marshal Li can't spare time to come back. Don't you support him? Speak.
Li Beitian was stunned and then laughed.
It's not my business.
I'm not the one to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace at the graduation ceremony.
Then who is it? Zhuang Huayang asked curiously. It's Yue Tong. Li Beitian said calmly.
The corner of Zhuang Huayang's mouth twitched violently, as if he couldn't believe it. When the Sword Emperor of the Wang family of Beihai and Li Tianlan were at loggerheads in Eastern Europe, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai spoke on behalf of Li Tianlan.
Is it Wang Yue Tong?
He couldn't help but ask again. Li Beitian shook his head and said, No, it's Yue Tong.
Wang Yue Tong was climbing the mountain.
The smooth mountain road of Mount Dibbing was getting farther and farther behind her.
She walked quietly and didn't take a car. Instead, she observed the beautiful scenery around Mount Dibbing step by step. She didn't leave Mount Dibbing for a long time, but when she came back this time, she felt as if a lifetime had passed. She was a little thinner, but she looked more beautiful. She used to be stubborn and lively, but now she was strong and calm. In a short time, she seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. In other words, it was a leap from immaturity to maturity. She passed the mountainside and approached the top.
There was an antique pavilion at the bottom of the mountain. In the summer when flowers and plants were flourishing, the pavilion was located among the flowers and plants, vicissitudes and elegance. Summer Solstice was standing in the pavilion and looking at Wang Yue Tong. Her eyes were full of helplessness and pity.
Wang Yue Tong's footsteps trembled slightly.
She stopped and looked at Summer Solstice without saying anything.
Why don't you take a car up?
Summer Solstice came over and tidied her daughter's hair, asking softly. Wang Yue Tong didn't say anything, but just whispered, Mom, have you thought it through? Summer Solstice said softly, If you have, come back.
I'll ask someone to help you tidy up your room.
Wang Yue Tong shook her head and whispered, I just want to come back to see you, Mom.
I'll go back later.
No matter where you are, you can only use it when you arrive at Mount Dibbing. Summer Solstice's voice was gentle and soft, but extremely firm. Wang Yue Tong bit her lip and didn't speak. Summer Solstice didn't seem to want to embarrass her daughter. She sighed softly, touched her short hair and whispered, Do you miss me?
Yes.
This chapter is not over.
Please turn the page.
Is there something else? Of course, if you want me to ask your father to let Tianlan go, you'd better not ask. At this time I can't persuade him, and I'm in no position to persuade him.
No.
Wang Yuetong shook her head and smiled bitterly. When I left here last time, I made up my mind. No matter what, I won't embarrass my father in the future, nor will I embarrass him. Summer Solstice looked at Wang Yuetong quietly, and there was some understanding in her eyes. Neither side embarrassed her, so she was the only one who was embarrassed.
Don't you feel wronged?
Summer Solstice asked softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, No. Summer Solstice was in a daze. She thought of the trial day in Eastern Europe. That night, even when the snow dance corps collapsed and Li Tianlan's life was at stake, Wang Yuetong didn't make a sound. She had never called Summer Solstice or Wang Tianzong. That night, Eastern Europe was turned upside down. That night, Jianghu state was turbulent. That night, Tiannan felt like a year. What was Wang Yuetong thinking about that night? Tianlan won't die this time. With his current position, at least in Eastern Europe this time, your father can't kill him. But silly girl, do you know that President Li Huaqing brought nearly 60 families to Eastern Europe this time? Most of them belong to the giant group. Even if a few people from other groups want to get benefits in Eastern Europe, they must get Li Tianlan's approval. Among them, there are people from the Special Warfare Group. He will contact more and more people, and his foundation will become more and more stable. In any case, this is what your father doesn't want to see. He can't do anything to Tianlan, but it doesn't mean that he can't do anything to those people. Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong's face turned pale for a moment, and then she shook her head and said, Mom, I'm not here to listen to this. Xia Ji sighed again and said helplessly, Well, what do you want to tell me? I'm here for the graduation ceremony of the Sky Academy. Wang Yuetong said softly. Summer Solstice's face changed slightly. At the graduation ceremony, Yuetong will speak on behalf of East Emperor Palace. Wang Yuetong's eyes were clear and firm.
Yuetong?
Summer Solstice narrowed her eyes. Wang Yuetong agreed and became more determined. Summer Solstice sighed softly. Yuetong's surname was neither Wang nor Li. Had he lost his surname after all? Have you ever thought that if this goes on one day, you will have nowhere to go? Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, No. Summer Solstice smiled bitterly. When she was about to speak, the entire Mount Dibing trembled for no reason. It was not an earthquake. The magnificent Mount Dibing trembled for a moment and then returned to normal. In an instant, the entire Mount Dibing was filled with sword energy. Endless sword energy stirred the space and came back from all directions on the ground. In the core area of the top of Mount Dibing, a space completely condensed by sword energy suddenly rushed to the sky. The world seemed to become dim. All the colors on Mount Dibing faded. Sword light lit up in the majestic sword energy. There was only black and white. The black and white sword light enveloped the entire Mount Dibing. The sky and the earth all became hazy for a while. This is... Wang Yuetong was absent-minded for a moment. This sword is called Coldness of 9 States. Summer Solstice's voice was faint. The black and white sword light flickered slightly. Under the sword light, a flame suddenly rose up. The flame was not blazing, but it kept burning. The color was extremely bright. Even in the black and white sword light, it was still extremely strong. For the first time, there was surprise in Summer Solstice's eyes. It's Xianxia, she said. He broke through. End of this chapter. Chapter 556. Li Huaqing's time was indeed tight. Therefore, as soon as the memorial service ended, Jianghu State had already determined the time for the welcome dinner with Wulan State. This dinner, which was destined to divide up most of the property of Wulan State and even the 5 Eastern European countries, would be held tomorrow evening. At this time, it was enough for many important figures in Eastern Europe to come to Reki City, and it was also enough for Jianghu State and Wulan State to sign a series of agreements. This was the main purpose of Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State. The dinner party had to be held after the signing of the agreement. Only in this way could Jianghu State be sure of what it had got and then negotiate with all the powerful families in Eastern Europe. Therefore, not only Li Huaqing was pressed for time, but Wulan State was also pressed for time. They had to finalize all the agreements on the last day.
The agreements that were about to be signed largely represented the future of Wulan State. Rick seemed to be prepared. When the Snow Dance Corps retreated, he had already arranged for someone to lead the delegation of Jianghu State to the hotel. As for Li Tianlan, Li Huaqing, and Wang Tianzong, they went directly to the office of the president, or to the place where Wang Tianzong was imprisoned. The new location of the office of the president will be about 9 kilometers away. The original location of the Caesar Hotel will become the new office of the president. This square will be expanded. I have communicated with Commander Chang Huaining of the Arctic Ocean Command and reported to Minister Dongqing. Within 3 months, the Arctic Ocean Command will support the Snow Dance Corps with a batch of armaments. With them here, Wulan State will be stable in the future. The black Hongqi was driving on the highway. Li Tianlan looked at the parade square outside the window and reported in a calm tone. At this time, Riker was not in the car. Li Zhonghu drove in person, so he could speak freely. Therefore, Li Tianlan had no scruples and said straightforwardly, Jianghu State can be more ruthless. On this point, Riker has enough psychological preparation. After the agreement is signed, there will be some details. I will talk to Riker then. Li Huaqing patted his shoulder and said gently, You've worked hard. Li Tianlan shook his head and said quietly, The soldiers of the Snow Dance Corps are working hard. Of course. Li Huaqing nodded. Jianghu State will commend them collectively and improve their treatment. As for the martyrs who sacrificed themselves, I will inform the military headquarters to increase their compensation. We can't let these heroes die with worry. Listening to Li Huaqing's habitual official tone, Li Tianlan was silent for a while and did not speak. What about the rotation of the Snow Dance Corps? Wang Tianzong, who was silent, suddenly kept his composure. He asked. Li Huaqing's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. He said blandly, The current plan is that the rotation time is 3 years. The members of the Snow Dance Corps are real iron-blooded men. 3 years later they will return home. Li Zhonghu suddenly opened his mouth and said, We have consulted all the experts in advance. Of a warrior. In my opinion, they are willing to stay here for the next 3 years. What about 3 years later? Wang Tianzong continued asking. Li Tianlan glanced at him, smiled, and said nothing. The meaning was obvious. Since Li Tianlan, Reki City would naturally be in the hands of the Li family. The Li family did not mind other people coming to take a share, but they must abide by the order of the Li family. Only the military power maintained the order. More than 10,000 elites of the Snow Dance Corps were stationed here, fully equipped, which was equivalent to tens of thousands of troops. They would be stationed here for 3 years. As for what troops would come after 3 years, it was something that Li Tianlan should consider. It had nothing to do with Wang Tianzong. It was only 3 years. With Li Tianlan's current momentum, could he really come up with an army that could replace the Snow Dance Corps after 3 years if he held Reki City tightly? It's good for young people to be confident. Wang Tianzong said slowly. Li Tianlan quietly waited for Wang Tianzong's but Wang Tianzong, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He did not go on, so he nodded and said, Yes. A part of the Beihai Corps will be stationed in Eastern Europe in the near future, and the garrison area will probably be concentrated in Snow Country. If the Snow Dance Corps is under pressure, Marshal Li can temporarily mobilize the Beihai Corps to be stationed in Reki City. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. Li Huaqing frowned and did not speak. The Beihai Corps would be stationed in Snow Country? Snow Country was the world's hegemon. Although their experience was backward, they still maintained the world's top military strength. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, all the superpowers had stayed in Snow Country, but no one was willing to fight in Snow Country. Now the chaos in Eastern Europe was about to end. Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. Take action? Perhaps Snow Country itself did not know that the Beihai Corps was going to be stationed in Snow Country, right? Are you sure? Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. Yes. Wang Tianzong was calm and simple. It was just one word, but he said it with great confidence. If you need support, just say it, Your Majesty. Although the Snow Dance Corps is small, we will not be stingy with support. Wang Tianzong said faintly, Marshal Li, take care of yourself first. Even if there is no war in Wulong State in the future, it will be extremely lively. If you need to borrow troops, just come to me.
Li Tianlan sneered and did not speak.
Both of you are the pillars of Jianghu State. There is no need to make many things so rigid. Jianghu State is very big and can accommodate the Wang family of Beihai. Naturally, there is also the soil for the development of the Li family. Especially now, both of you are outside Jianghu State. I hope you two can still make a fool of yourself. I hope you two can still focus on the overall situation. Li Huaqing had a headache. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe, if everything was not obvious, the conflict between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had become extremely acute. Li Huaqing came to Reki City this time mainly for the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. But in private, he also wanted to coordinate the relationship between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan. The current Sword Emperor and the future East Emperor were the present and the future of Jianghu State. In the future, the conflict between the two would continue to intensify, which was a good thing for everyone outside Jianghu State. But for Jianghu State, no one wanted to see it.
Before Li Huaqing left, he received a lot of very important calls, including the leaders of the Southeast Group, the Giant Group, and even the senior executives of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. The grievances between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family were difficult to completely solve, but countless people hoped that Li Huaqing could control the conflict between the two within a certain range. But now, Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. But his purpose was obviously not just for Snow Country. Once he took down Snow Country and stationed a large number of troops in Snow Country, the Snowdance Corps and the Beihai Corps in Snow Country were bound to have constant conflicts in the future. The positions of the two sides would also make the soldiers of both sides want to annex the other. Just like what the two people said just now, the support seemed very generous. But thinking about it, whether it was the Snowdance Corps or the Beihai Corps, if they encountered problems in Eastern Europe, they would not ask for help from the other side even if they died in battle. It was easy to invite a god in, but difficult to send him away. The strength of Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong was not equal. Limited to Eastern Europe, their status was already equal. Once their armies entered each other's territory, if one side insisted on not leaving, the other side really had no good way. Li Huaqing also had no good way. The Wang family of Beihai had its own development path. He could not persuade Wang Tianzong to give up Snow Country, and he was reluctant to do so. But he was also reluctant to let Li Tianlan give up Wulong State. The final result could only be that the Beihai Corps and the Snowdance Corps stayed in Eastern Europe to fight openly and secretly. Now the only thing Li Huaqing could do was to persuade these two chosen one to really take the overall situation into account. The car slowly turned and stopped in the square in front of the office of the president. Li Huaqing got out of the car and suddenly asked, "How is Tribulation's injury?" It was also a big deal. For, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. For any country, the physical condition of an invincible realm expert in its country was a big deal. And his words could be regarded as a reminder to Wang Tianzong. The new commander of the Snowdance Corps recommended by Li Tianlan was Tribulation. Tribulation was no match for Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan were the same. They could not stay in Eastern Europe for a long time. If Wang Tianzong left, no matter who was stationed in Snow Country, they would not be a match for Tribulation. Jiang might be able to stop Tribulation, but the Border Control Corps was obviously more important. Wang Tianzong would not leave him in Eastern Europe. As long as he left, the Snowdance Corps would obviously have more confidence than the Beihai Corps. Moreover, Tribulation's qualifications and abilities were enough. Even the Southeast Group could not find any reason to object to him replacing Li Tianlan. Martial Uncle's injury is fine. Li Tianlan did not say it clearly. In fact, Tribulation's injury was very serious, but it was not really fatal. Most of his injuries came from the loss of strength caused by his entanglement with Paul. As for other injuries, although they were also serious, he had regained his ability to move. After that, he would recover very quickly. Even if Li Tianlan had to leave in a short time, he could rest assured. In his current state, he is fully competent for the position of commander of the Snowdance Corps. Tribulation is naturally reassuring to be the marshal. Reki City may not be peaceful in the future. There is no clue about Jiang Shongyu's disappearance. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for Marshal Li to leave at this time.
Wang Tianzong said blandly. It was also a reminder. Even if the general placed here by the Wang family of Beihai was no match for tribulation, there was still Zhang Shangyu in the Snowdance Corps. And compared with Gu Xingyun, who was afraid that Li Tianlan had troops in Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong did not want Li Tianlan to go to Tiannan. Otherwise, he would not have hesitated to break through until now. I won't leave until I find Zhang Shangyu, Li Tianlan said blandly. They slowly walked into the messy office of the president and into the room where Wang Tianzong temporarily lived. Although it's good to talk here, the hotel is better. Tianzong, Tianlan, what happened before was just a misunderstanding. Now that it's over, it's okay to talk it over. Wulan State is fully capable of arranging a residence for Tianzong that is more suitable for his identity. Li Huaqing said with a chuckle, but his eyes were looking at Li Tianlan. On the trial day, the news that he had imprisoned Wang Tianzong had spread throughout Jianghu State, which made his prestige soar. Now that the matter was over, he continued to lock Wang Tianzong up. It was meaningless. Sure enough, Li Tianlan nodded and said, I have no problem with that. No need. Wang Tianzong laughed. He reached out and poured a cup of tea for Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan respectively. He said slowly, It's good here. It's quiet, and no one will disturb me when I practice calligraphy. I'm very satisfied with it. He paused and said with a smile, Anyway, I won't live for a long time. I'll stay here. How long? How long? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. His eyes were a little dignified. Wang Tianzong was about to speak when his cell phone suddenly rang. He took out his cell phone and looked at it. It was a text message from Summer Solstice. Wang Tianzong looked down at the text message. Quietly, Li Tianlan suddenly noticed that every inch of space around him had become extremely sharp and awe-inspiring. Wang Tianzong seemed to be sharper than before. He glanced at Li Tianlan and said blandly, 3 days, that's enough. Li Tianlan's pupils instantly contracted to the extreme. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.